Are we live?
Yes, we are live. Exactly.
We are live.
Right now. So
Welcome to the Nava.
now I'm gonna grab the link and share it, and then we can do our secret sauce stuff. Oh yes, It gives.
It's such a nice day, though. I feel like it's rude to. Let's see if I can pan the camera to the outside world. You can almost see the outside world.
I can see some.
It looks
trees.
like that looks hazy and cloudy, but that's not the case. I think that's just dust on my window.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful day.
Oh my god, it's amazing.
Maybe if I pan the other way, you can see the sun rays. Let's see.
Yeah.
Ooh,
yeah. It's.
pan.
I can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. If I just move out of the way.
Yeah, you get out of it and then it focuses. This is how we start every live stream. Oh, I have to tweet the link.
Oh yeah, we teased everyone that this was going to happen. Oh, now it's not focusing on my face.
You jinxed it.
Oh, I've broken everything. Simon, what have you done? If only
Bang,
you lived
bang,
in Melbourne
bang.
instead of Sydney, this wouldn't be a problem.
So I
You would have known what the weather is like.
But you see, it looks. It's the same deal, but outside here looks exactly the same.
Ah, beautiful.
It looks
Very nice.
It looks over what? Overcast. It looks like overexposed, but it's actually it's like
very
this crisp blue and green and 20 degree. Like it's amazing. That's how we prepare for podcasts. Oh, that's a nice view.
Just broke my focus. That's fine.
Yeah, John is going undercover today. Oh, Super Bass was like the hat was like perfectly focused. Not anymore.
I keep moving towards where the camera is.
Yes.
Super bass.
It's cool with the mic in like blurry depth of field thingy.
Yeah. Maybe we
I
should
just wanna check if we get some people coming, and I am today going to pay attention to the comments because I feel like there would be some interesting questions, and I would love to address them if they're nice questions. Like it's like. We probably don't want to go into crazy rants. But yeah, if there's interesting questions. Hang on, I gotta... So, who is what... I don't know if anyone's watching, but it doesn't matter. Usually we start by doing some light check and stuff. But I almost want to do the episode with the windows open. It's so nice.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I feel like I don't want to close them because it's such a nice day. We look well, I guess I could turn my face lights on.
Yeah, I've got my lights. I usually close it for if there's barking dogs or birds going nuts. But it's actually, I feel like a tiny bit of birds in the background is not going to...
No.
And I can't hear anything.
Oh, you've got the windows open.
Like wide, like slit.
I didn't realize that was an option.
I'm going to show you something. Because of the heat, crazy heat in summer, I've actually put this reflective panel right on the window to kind of keep the heat out because it's facing north. And north in Australia is where the sun hits smack bang all day. And I was like, this is perfect. It keeps the room a bit colder. But now if I want any light, I need to physically open the window because the thing covers the whole glass window. So I'll close it to show you.
Right. Maybe I should open my windows.
So you can see that shiny material.
Yeah.
It's like what you put usually in the sheds and garages, like right against the panels, and it creates that little trap in between.
Nice.
But then it's dark. Like the second I do this, it means it turns all dark, which is pretty disappointing. Yeah.
All right. I'm just sharing your tweet.
I
reckon leave the windows open. Get that fresh air in. Maybe I'll open mine a little bit as long as there isn't too much road noise.
It can be a healthy podcast recording conditions.
Yeah.
Do I allow?
Yeah, we're not trapped in the suffocation box this time.
Yeah, it's like every time I finish recording and I open the window, I instantly okay, I'm taking a lunch break. I'm going outside because what the hell was I doing in this box?
That's so fresh.
Also, recording this
So
podcast
fresh.
recording this post. Yeah, I remember doing the Tailwind videos in summer. I would record before 10 a.m. and then after 2 p.m. because otherwise it's like absolutely between the heat of the room plus the lights, it was like stupid. I can't say that word.
Yeah. I've got the luxury situation. I shouldn't brag so much, but I've got like a reverse cycle aircon up there that's like silent. And that was like one of the big things of moving into
Yeah,
this box. Because, well, yeah, I guess you might not even know, but this is like an external office separate from the house.
I know
And
that.
so this,
I've wa-
you know this.
I've
So it
watched
was
your
like,
video where you walk through.
it was in, that was when it was like still only not fully built.
Yeah,
But yeah, this was something that we built when, well, yeah, when we were having kids and also the pandemic was happening. We were like, oh, we are going to run out of space if I need to work from home as well. And yeah, ended up like one of my parents' friends is a builder and was able to build it actually like very affordably.
yeah,
But
that
yeah, I
looks
got to
sweet.
like build it to exactly what I wanted. And the reverse cycle aircon was a big part of that.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a huge, especially if it's silent and you can keep it on for the recording.
Yeah. Yeah. But it does kind of encourage me to just close up all the windows and do long recordings all day
Yeah.
instead of getting fresh air. So
Yes, this I
sometimes
have
having these windows
the
open.
I have the opposite problem where this house, it's like a thin little black roof, so it picks up all the heat. I think I've
Right.
covered the window thinking it comes from the side, and it does a bit. But in summer, like if I put my arms just up, I can feel literally the radiation, like
Wow.
an oven. Like you go higher, and it's all the heat gets trapped under the roof. And then
Right.
I have all these black blankets that just pick up all the heat and retain it. That and the lights, and I was like, it's the worst possible scenario. So the idea, it's actually, that's also why I try to get a mic that rejects a lot of background noise, because the whole idea of having the perfect sound was not an option. But if that works, it sounds pretty good to me. If that works well for
Yeah.
the podcast, I might do it. And I even have the door open here. Usually I close the door, I close everything. Except no one else can experience that right now. But I left the door open and one of the dogs came. He left, so I can't show it to you. But the reason he left is he walked in and did a dog fart and then left. And I don't know if dog farts are something, they smell, but they also taste a little, like they're so thick. Anyone who's got a dog will concur. Like it's, you can't even blame
And we just
a
lost all
child
of our people that had joined us live have just disconnected immediately. I
Yes.
don't want the dog fart podcast.
Yeah, what's the
We
rebrand?
should rename it. Actually, we were just creating a Navbar Twitter account. So maybe we should rebrand it as the dog fart podcast.
Yes, it's common. It's commonly known that I talk a lot about basketball and dogs at the moment. So there we go.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to show the crazy audience of how many?
One person.
Two, or it's
Two
me
people.
and maybe
Ooh.
you. Two and someone.
Yeah.
So the process, I'll actually do this. That's going to be really cool. I'm going to, instead of just sharing, and that goes for John. John as the guest can see what you see on the stream and nothing else. But I have this option to go live demo with Ecamm Live. So it kind of now shows all my controls as the kind of like stream producer. So you can see I have different scenes. If I want to just show just myself, hello. And the split is going to be with John on the side and then John by himself. And then I'm going to experiment with a few slides that I share. So you can see we both here still with some nice slides in the middle. So that's how we operate the stream. And you can see I've assigned these little numbers. So if I go command 1, it's going to go to me. Command 2, split. So I can do it with the keyboard that's just there. And one thing I like to do, it's probably nitpicking, but I like to have our faces kind of aligned and same size, so you can see I can take John and move him around. So I like to try to have similar sort of like sizes and shapes for both of us. It doesn't always work, but when you get a guest, here's a pro tip. It's kind of nice to try to align both people. So I'm gonna probably have to zoom myself a bit and go low like this. Yeah.
Very
And
nice.
this, you set that up at the start, and then you have this kind of production, assuming the person doesn't decide to change everything.
Hello, Simon.
You get this production.
Why
totally
aren't you looking me in the eyes? Look me in the eyes, Simon.
Can we do a
There we go.
fist bump?
Let's see. Too far.
That worked.
Very good.
That's the magic. So I do that really quickly for that scene and also that scene, but we've done that last week, so it kind of works. So if I check John, again, I can decide how to frame Mr. Myers, but I think that's pretty cool. And again, you can see John is like way more zoomed in here, so I might zoom out a bit, but then he's a bit too low, so it's like I said nitpicking. It's kind of nice to just, yeah.
My role in the podcast is to try to reel Simon in from doing too much crazy stuff like this and make sure that we actually get podcast recorded. Because it took us 4 weeks of planning to get the first episode recorded because Simon is just too good at what he does and wants everything to be awesome and high quality and perfectly optimized for every audience.
And so that's my... going live and showing you the process is my therapeutic way to get better at this. I thought if we live, we can't just fluff around for an hour and say, oh, let's just take a break and record after, like we live. So we kind of have to fast forward the thing. And I would love someone to put a comment so it shows, but I'll do it myself. Imagine you're one person watching, which is just me. So we've lost people at the dog fart. Hello, Nav Bar. If you comment, you're going to see it appear down here. Hey, Ooh. And then I can add it here to the broadcast. Boom. So if you have a question and you ask a question and it's a good question or an interesting topic, we can bring you here and address this, and then you get your moment of fame. Worse, like I'm getting ahead of myself, but we could even invite someone and join and ask a question in live.
This is what happens. He gets on a roll and he just starts going crazy. Can't hold back.
Yes. So as long as we have a scene where we're both there, and then I have this little thing, if I want to share some slides, which I will, that's all we need. And then we can just go live. Levels are good. Is your mic level? Can you speak for us?
Hello.
Yeah,
welcome to the Nav Bar.
You can see John is dangerously close to getting into... Oh,
dangerous. Should I can crank down a little bit. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm up a little high.
Yeah, I didn't hear you clip.
A little high.
But yeah.
What about now? Is that better?
Yeah, I think it's great. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's like a microphone if you record audio, we're going to talk about Tailwind, but just quick audio tips since we're content creators. Way better having your audio a bit too low than too high, because if it's too high, it's going to clip. And clip is when it starts distorting. You hear people laugh and it has that really like grungy, grindy sound. And it's the exact same thing that happens when you take a photo with too much exposure. And all the white become white, and essentially you lose information because you can't recover it. It's all completely white out. And the same underexposed, all the blacks take over. And you can't in post kind of recover it by adding some data, because you've literally lost it and you've clipped it. And the audio is the same. Like if your audio clips, there is nothing you can do to bring back this nice quality of audio. It's just like you shoved it a bit too hard into the system, and it's like a flat line. You can see when you look at the audio form, it hits the top and bottom and it's completely flat. So
yeah,
if it's too low,
sounds
you can boost
awesome on sick guitar solos, big guitar solos.
Yeah. Not
so good on beautiful dynamic voices.
And yeah, that's one thing, especially in sports broadcasting, you can see like usually good TV channels, like national channels, they have perfect audio, but some like these small TV local region channels, most of the time they don't have a limiter or something. So when people get excited, it clips all the time. And once you know what clipping sounds like, it attacks you even more. And with all that said, maybe
welcome to the Nav Bar.
Oh, we've got a new subscriber again. But yeah, so I thought I'd show you this interface because it's pretty cool. So now I'm going to go. What was I need to know Command Shift D. So I'm gonna go back to this. So it's now just the stream again. And
All right.
I definitely need to drink some water. I need to tell John to let's do the audio sync.
Yeah, synced up audio sip. All right, here we go.
I don't have bubbles in the water this time because
no spicy water.
I was like, every time I took a sip, I was like combating the need to let the bubbles do their thing.
You're just going with capsicum water this time.
You can. Oh, hang on, I gotta go shift 1, just so you can see this. I have told in my pre-flight checklist, I've told John to make sure that this button is red like this now. It's harder to see with the open window, but it means
I can't see it anymore, so I can't tell you if it's red or not. Like I can see it now, but I mean when we have the other view.
Yeah. So that means I'm recording the audio backup in case the live stream recording doesn't happen. And I demand Mr. John Myers to do the same on his end. I think you're using ScreenFlow or something?
ScreenFlow, yes.
Yeah.
I was going to say StreamYard. That's not right.
So the whole idea, when I
ScreenFlow.
finish recording with Ecamm, it gives me John's audio, my audio, plus any... it goes... any sound audio. This now is its own channel that's going to be multiple gigabytes of audio just to have that moment of action. And anything you pipe through like gets his own channel. So we should be good, but it's nice to have a local backup. Why do I talk so much, man?
Yeah, how about we record the episode? You can talk the whole episode.
I thought going live early was going to clean up all this and make us record.
We still just hang out and talk trash for too long. It doesn't matter whether we're recording or streaming or anything. It's the nature of the beast. It's too much fun hanging out with you, Simon.
I hear a bit more echo, so I'm just going to put that one thing on the wall and I'm ready.
Okay. Can you hear any car noise outside?
Say bad stuff about me now. I can't hear you.
Ha ha ha. Simon's so nice. I can't even do it. I tried. He's too nice. He's too lovely.
I put it here and I hear he's too nice. I'm sure you said stuff in between.
Yeah, that's what we were saying the whole time. Shh.
I can watch the stream again.
Oh, damn it. What about that? We gotta stop recording everything we do and making it available. All right, Simon. Are you ready to go?
I like this.
Are you good?
I am good. I like this episode with like the daylight Australia. Like we live in one of the best weather countries in the world, and then we record in these like dark boxes with artificial light.
Yeah.
So there's still the artificial light, but it's
nice.
That's
what I was gonna say. It still sucks. There's this like fluorescent white like light in my eyes, but other than that, it's really nice having the natural light outside. It's definitely nice having the fresh air. The fresh air makes a huge difference.
And just before we go, I'm going to give you the information that you didn't know that you wanted. That you are coming at 720p, which is not. Sometimes it's 1080. I don't know why, but 720 is good enough for what we do.
Yes. I wonder why that is though. Can you hear that truck?
I did hear and I felt like I was in my road, but it's like almost nothing. And you cannot mask a truck. Come on.
Yeah, but I could close the windows. That's what I mean. Is it worth being in the suffocation box, or are we all right? All right.
I already regret closing that door thing because now there's less airflow already. Far out. All right.
Got to get that airflow. Although your airflow comes with dog farts, so maybe not worth it.
It's a trade-off. The worst would be to get the dog fart in and then close everything and keep it trapped.
Just the whole podcast episode.
Hang on. We got someone from Brazil.
Oh.
Bom dia. We're going to add Leonardo. Thanks for joining. I love when we're in Australia and we think who's going to join and then someone from Brazil shows up. It's awesome. That's the beauty of the internet.
Yeah, this is what I've found with I'm doing like a weekly live stream for Superbase called the Superbase Happy Hour, and it's like we moved the time to try and make it more like appeal more to the US, and because we were only getting people joining at like 2 o'clock in the morning wherever they were. So we were like, all right, this isn't a convenient time. So we moved it to a convenient time for the US. And now like people just join us from wherever else it is 2 a.m. Like 2 a.m. just seems to be the time that people decide to click on some random live link to watch
So funny.
either a live podcast or a live stream.
Yeah, I have the same last thing. Maybe not. I have the same thing where I teach these Tailwind workshops, and it's like the idea is like to make it convenient for the West Coast of the US, Pacific time zone, 1 to 5 p.m. So it's like an afternoon workshop. Yeah. And the next workshop I teach, we just opened the tickets, and the first customers are from Germany, Iceland, and Mexico. So Mexico is like the same time zone, but Iceland and Germany is like pretty shifted. Like especially Germany, I feel like it's like somewhere in the middle of the night. I could be wrong. Yeah. But it's funny, you try you cater for like a specific audience, thinking this is kind of like the primary market we go after for this first workshop at this price point, and then it's like...
Yeah, I guess maybe with like a professional workshop, like people might be working during the day, and so maybe it is actually easier for them to be like, I'll join it at night so I don't need to like take a day off or negotiate with my boss or something. Yeah.
The idea is like teams sign up and then it's like a team thing during work hours, but it makes sense. Some people say, I don't want to have to go through the asking the boss, and also I'll just do it in the evening. And then maybe 9 p.m. till 1 a.m. is convenient.
Yeah, maybe. Should I leave and rejoin just to see if it does come in higher quality?
Oh, maybe.
Nah, we're going.
Yeah,
we're doing
remember
it.
we did
live.
this, and then I had to restart my computer because it said like a session is already...
That's true. So, this is usually what holds us up from recording most episodes. We actually plan to record 2 episodes every single week, and we've never done it because we have always... Oh, actually, no, there was once that we did it. But every time we just get distracted with chatting, catching up, and technical problems.
Well, I thought streaming that would clean up all of this. It can, not the catching up, but the podcast listeners, the audio version will start when John does his patented now intro, which is so like professional. Leonardo said it's in the evening, and I said bom dia, which is good morning or good day, and he says it's the night, so it's boa noite. I speak a little bit of Brazilian because I did capoeira when I was a teenager. Capoeira is like this martial arts / dance. Simon. It's really cool. Yeah, I told you, every single time you talk to me, you'll learn a facet of my life.
Just uncover another piece of the very interesting backstory of Simon.
So I used to do cartwheels and backflips and all the fancy stuff. I always wanted to do breakdancing, but in Switzerland there was this really harsh, like tough, like kind of like breakdancing was linked to like vandalism and being tough and being in fights and stuff, which I feel has changed now. But where I grew up, that's how it was. And I did gymnastics, and I loved the idea of doing this like acrobatics. And then I discovered this capoeira, which is exactly the mix of breakdancing and gymnastics and martial. And I was like, holy crap, this is awesome. I'm doing this.
That's awesome.
Yes, and it's everywhere in Australia. I haven't done it in 20 years, but it's everywhere. There's lots of Brazilians living here, and on the beach, it's kind of, I guess, like in Brazil, like the context environment to do it. With that, we might start the podcast.
Welcome to the number.
And then you wonder why we end up recording at like lunch break. That's why. But it's good. It's I feel like we like bonding with a listener, and this is how you build a community, and I enjoy this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no one else is watching live, so we're not wasting anyone's time. Maybe ours.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Hopefully if people join, they can join from where the live stream is up to, and they're not forced to go and watch the 20 minutes of us talking trash, talking about dog farts. All right. Simon, are you ready to go? Leonardo, are you ready to go?
It's literally the 3 of us.
We're in this together.
I'm going to let you do all the intro stuff. I have to say stuff at the intro as well.
Practice your lines, Simon.
Yeah, we have a rehearsed intro, and then we kind of go. And I have the teleprompter with the view here, the notes. Tailwind.
And I look off to the side and refuse to look in Simon's eyes, even though I have a teleprompter. I don't want you to be so small. looking into the teleprompter. I like having you on the big screen, big face. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing with teleprompters is like the screen is tiny. There's a limit to what the tray can hold, which means then the window is small. So it's great for reading words, but like I bought it for Zoom calls, and every now and then I move it to a bigger screen to actually see people.
All right, here we go. Take a sip of water.
Yes.
Leonardo, take a sip of water. Stay hydrated.
Caipirinha at 9:40 p.m. Or it's probably 10 by now because that was minutes ago. No, that was 5 minutes ago. Okay, I'm ready.
All right.
Don't sway me.
I've fixed the beard. We're good to go.
Comb the beard.
Comb the beard. Make sure it's all... You get the eyebrows right.
I'm here.
All right. All right, make sure that the two cords of the hoodie are hanging perfectly symmetrically, and this is fixed.
We managed to get sidetracked again.
All right, here we go. We're doing it.
Watch John turn into a professional and breathe in.
Here we go. All right, I'm ready to go. Let's record a podcast.
Yes, let's do it.
Welcome to the Navbar, a podcast where we help you navigate the web and raise the bar of your content creation. My name is John Myers. I'm a developer advocate from Supabase.
And I'm Simon Vrashliotis. I'm a designer, developer, and content creator from Sydney, Australia. You want me to do that one again?
Let's start again.
Oh. Try, mate. Maybe I should do a whole one with my Aussie accent. I thought of that one day. You've done your part perfectly. I can just redo my part if you want to be.
No, then I have to edit it. Anytime we make a mistake, we'll take it from the top again until we have a perfect take of the entire podcast.
Always start right at the intro.
That's a loud truck.
Is that bin day? Garbage bin day?
No, that would be a bad day to record. That's tomorrow.
Okay, we need to start because Leo is ready. And we have lots of people
Leonardo.
Now. Hello.
All right.
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. Take two. Click. All right. Professional Hollywood production here. Well, with your overlord setup of video production, it is Hollywood level. All right, let's not get into it. Here we go. No, we've lost him. Simon's. All right. Welcome to the Navbar, a podcast where we help you navigate the web and raise the bar of your content creation. My name is John Myers. I'm a developer advocate from Supabase.
And I'm Simon Vrashliotis. I'm a designer, developer, and content creator from Sydney, Australia. In this episode, we're going to talk about Tailwind CSS. So if you don't know, Tailwind CSS is a utility-first CSS framework, and it's rapidly becoming a standard in the industry. It's reached this critical mass where a lot more people are starting to use it and talk about it.
I am very keen for this episode. I feel like I have a good understanding of the basics of Tailwind, but I'm just blown away anytime you put content out because obviously there's so much more to it than just good typography and spacing scales and stuff like that. So let's get to the most important question. What is Tailwind CSS?
Great starting question. So I'm going to quote the Tailwind CSS website, which says Tailwind is a tool to rapidly build modern websites without ever leaving your HTML. So that's a loaded quote, right? So it means that you're designing in your HTML. So that means that you have to describe how your HTML should look, which you can already think some tension here because for a very long time we've heard HTML is the document, the semantics, how things looks is the context of CSS. And so the way you do this is by composing lots of little classes that have one function only, and it's called utility classes. They all have a utility, like adding a padding top value or adding a color or background color or a flex property like a flex grow or flex shrink or align content, stuff like this. And so that's what's called the utility first CSS methodology. But I think before we talk about Tailwind CSS itself, we need to talk about utility first CSS, because this is the big bucket, the big approach and methodology that Tailwind falls in. So you have approaches like BEM, which is this block element modifier approach. There's SMAX. There's lots of different CSS philosophies and approach, and utility first is a completely different one, which is what Tailwind is using.
Okay.
Is that a good intro?
So utility first. That is a very good intro to what Tailwind is. So yes, I have heard a lot about this idea of utility first CSS. So what is it? I guess we just covered that.
Yes. So I think I'm going to switch my production mode. Again, if you're listening to the audio version, you're not missing out much at all. But I have a couple of slides here. So John and I are now looking at a series of buttons. And I know we're talking about Tailwind. This happens to be in Tachyons, which is another framework which was a bit earlier with the same philosophy. So this is a series of buttons. There's a black button, a pink button, a green button. And that is how they look. And then the next slide is how the code looks. And this is essentially a repetition of lots of little classes. We have F6, which is the font size 6, Link, which is, I don't even remember what that one is, Dim, which dims on hover, BR3 is border radius 3, PH3 is padding horizontal 3, PV2 is padding vertical 2, and these are Tachyon classes, not Tailwind classes, but the whole idea is you sprinkle all these utilities that together describe how this button should look. And
yeah, see, this is confusing I've never seen this before, but this looks very confusing at first glance, especially when you're explaining that like some of them are like hover effects and some of them are just like collections of utilities or collections of CSS rules. That seems very, very confusing and like it's going to take a lot to learn.
So everyone, and when I say everyone, I include myself, I include the creators of Tailwind, like anyone, it's a mandatory initial gut reaction, because at the core of it, you put presentational concerns in the HTML, which goes against the whole thing that we've always fought for, and web standards and the CSS Zen Garden approach said your HTML should have zero visual concerns, which means you can restyle it completely with CSS. And then separation of concerns. HTML is literally the document. What is a link? What is an H2 tag? What is an unordered list? And then the styling is completely the concern of CSS. And you compose these two languages to do two things. And now we're in the HTML. And if you look at it and understand the classes, you can see how the UI looks like. But now you've kind of blended HTML and CSS concerns in the HTML, which for some people is a terrible idea, because we have broken separation of concerns. It's unsemantic. Yeah. It breaks the web. It's horrible and all these things.
I remember at university that was very much drilled into us, that separation of concerns, that like anything structural was HTML, anything presentational was CSS, and then anything like interactive was JavaScript. And if you broke that rule, you just failed the unit. So I remember that being... I still have this kind of knee-jerk reaction. Even when I see Tailwind, I still have this kind of knee-jerk reaction that I'm like, oh, should it be there? But yeah, when you actually use it, it definitely makes sense why.
Yeah. So I show this because this is almost a mandatory step. You have to go through this motion. And if you look at anyone who's advocating for Tailwind CSS these days, if you go back in their timeline, there's a point where they're gonna do this like dunking tweet where they take a screenshot of something like this and like, this is terrible. Why are we doing this? This is a terrible idea. And I have a couple of things I want to show. And this is 3 people that I myself looked up to when I learned web development. They have very, very high followings, and they were like pioneers of the web in the early days. And here's the sort of things that you hear and see. And you can see exactly what I was saying. There's this knee-jerk reaction, and this is a terrible mistake from the past, and we're doing it again, and we're breaking the web and all these things. And it's essentially your starting point in the journey when you learn about Tailwind CSS or Utility First CSS. if that makes sense.
Yes, I remember it being very, controversial, especially in, like, I was in the React community, and there was so much emphasis on removing, like, inline styling, which was a big part, I think, of kind of the initial iteration of React. People were just putting inline styles because it was easier. We were creating components, and it kind of, it helped... break those scoping problems and rules overriding other rules. And so, there was this huge move away from that and to these different kind of systems for managing your CSS. And so when the brand new system that was coming out that everyone was talking about was putting the CSS rules back in the HTML, it didn't feel right.
Yeah, totally. And before we actually talk about why it's good, I just want to show you a couple more things and talk about a few more things. One of the common hot take is that it's unsemantic and non-semantic classes break the web. So HTML semantics are very important, and you always hear like you should describe what a website is, what the document is, and that's how screen readers and search engines can do their thing properly. And the confusion here is the confusion between semantic HTML and semantic classes. So semantic HTML, like using the appropriate tags for an aside, for an image, a list, items, and unordered list, all these things is very important. But there is no such thing as semantic classes as far as the computer is concerned, right? Of course, as a team, a semantic class means it describes what it styles, like a header outline or like a sidebar banner or something like this. That's the descriptive thing. But in terms of breaking the web, it's completely wrong. Like there's nothing, the computer actually doesn't care how a class name is named. It's just like a label or reference for looking for styles, and you can name it whatever you think your team think is useful, and it's not going to break the web at all. You hear like, oh, it's unsemantic and therefore it's going to penalize your SEO and your search and your accessibility, but it's just not right. And there's Mr. Nicholas Gallagher wrote an article 10 years ago, 2012, in March, so it's more than 10 years ago. It's called About HTML Semantics and Front-End Architecture. We'll put it in the show notes once John builds this website that is about to live stream, maybe not, who knows. This article, I want you to go and read it because it goes through a lot of the whole approach of utility classes and how it's actually very good for performance and it doesn't affect semantics and accessibility and all these things. And there's a really interesting part where he talks about gzip and performance, and it's a really good read. And it's 10 years old, and this thing is still, right now, I share it every 3 months, and it still feels groundbreaking. It's talking about concepts that we still kind of feel are like new and upcoming, and it's like, it's amazing.
Yeah, I haven't read that. I'll have to check it out.
You definitely check that out. And the last thing I want to say is the thing that often is taken is that we can't. Once you mix your presentational class names inside your HTML, you've blended and you have stopped decoupling your HTML and your CSS, like HTML documents, CSS styles. You keep them separate. And something I want to quote Adam Wathan, the creator of Tailwind CSS, for is how he challenged this. And he says that he sees the relationship between HTML and CSS as a dependency direction. And it's a two-way street. So when you have HTML, you can restyle if you keep your HTML with semantic classes, so it doesn't have any presentational concerns. You can restyle this HTML at will without changing it. And that's what CSS Garden demonstrated. You have the same document, and people would submit their CSS style sheets, nothing else. They couldn't touch the HTML. And all the demos are completely different, and it's an incredible demo of what you can do with just CSS. But when you do that, the thing is, the CSS is the thing that it's not reusable at all because you've coupled every single class to how it should look. So in a way, you have the HTML that's decoupled and can be restyled, but the CSS is used for just that project and you can't use that anywhere else. So there's that sort of dependency direction in that way. And then when you use presentational class names like Tailwind does, so utility classes, well, now you can't restyle your HTML without changing it because it has visual concerns. So people say, hey, yeah, but when you have a redesign, you have to change the HTML, which is, yeah, that's right. But What happens is the exact opposite. You have your CSS that you can reuse at will across any project. And the whole idea behind Tailwind is that, of course, you can write CSS if you want, but without writing any CSS, you can use Tailwind and build completely different looking websites. You could, if you want to do the CSS Zen Garden or the HTML Zen Garden demo, where you have a CSS file, which is Tailwind, and people submit completely different looking websites by changing the HTML only, which is the reverse. And I did a conference talk about all this slide that I'm sharing. Even if you don't see it, that doesn't matter. I've done a conference talk, and I was trying to find a good analogy for this dependency of direction, visual analogy. And I used to be a sports teacher, and one thing that I compared it to is a high jump in athletics. So for years and years, people would jump. It was called the straddle, the technique. They would jump with their belly over the bar. So they would run and jump over the bar with the belly. And then in the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, a guy called Dick Fosbury said, you know what, I'm going to flip this and I'm going to jump with my back over the bar. And if you know anything about high jump, there's a technique called the Fosbury flop. And this is Dick Fosbury, who literally at the Olympics kind of unveiled this new technique that he was working on. And he won the gold medal at these Olympics by quite a significant margin. And that's 50 more years ago now. And this is still the technique that is used. There's a font missing, but the idea you can see here on the left, that's the old technique. And on the right, it's the Fosbury technique. So it literally inverted the approach, which is what Tailwind CSS does. It flips the whole, the dependency is going to be, the reusable stuff is the CSS and the HTML changes it. So it flips CSS Zen Garden upside down. And still nowadays, 50 years later, everyone uses the Fosbury technique. So the whole idea is that you never know what happens when you try something different.
Yeah, so you're saying the expected correct way to do things is not always the best way to do things, and that we should continue to challenge these things and maybe look at it from different angles and reassess whether this is the best way to do it. So you've convinced me that this is... the semantic side of it is not a problem. So what are the benefits of using a utility-first CSS framework?
Yeah, so I thought that was important to go through that first, because you look like as until you've gone through this with someone, they are going to be, yeah, but what about inline style? Yeah, but like they're convinced and they feed against the wall that it's a horrible technique. So that's why when I did my conference talk, I was like, I can't jump straight into why it's awesome, because people are just it's gonna go over their head, and the whole time they're gonna say, but that's one of these young people that grew up with React and inline styles, and they don't understand the foundations of the web. No. I used to love CSS Zen Garden, and that's how I was building stuff, and I would never have any visual styles in my CSS, in my HTML, sorry. And I've gone through this, and now I'm still convinced that utility first is a great way. So let's talk about it, knowing that it's not just because he doesn't know better, right? So one of the things, the main benefits is speed and simplicity, if you could summarize it in 2 words. Why speed and simplicity? Step 1, you never leave your HTML. You add classes in your markup. So as you build something, there's a little helicopter that goes through. I just take a sip of water and redo that sentence just in case. I love giving John some editing work.
Yeah, well, if we've already got the editing work. Leonardo is shouting out that, at first glance it felt like a little polluted coming from the React world. But then, with good code splitting and compensation, this disadvantage, it was extremely compensated by the productivity. So like once you actually start doing it, you realize, these are, there are some real benefits here. And I think what I'm about to set up Simon for after this section is how it's how you can shake out all of the bits that you don't use, because otherwise you just have this giant CSS file that can do absolutely everything, and it's like, well, now you're just using a whole bunch of, or creating a whole bunch of classes and shipping a whole bunch of classes that you don't need.
We'll definitely talk about that.
We will.
One more little tidbit sidebar is, like, John can see the comments, so it's kind of nice. If you have a question, maybe I talk so much that I forget to look. He sees them too, and we can kind of address that. But what I was saying is, you never leave your HTML because you sprinkle utility classes directly in the HTML. So Working in just one file, if you think about it, it's super productive because you're laser focused, you have no context switching. It's kind of what made React so popular, that you could have the markup and the logic and the styles and everything in one place. And this collocation of concerns kind of goes against separation of concerns in one way you think about it. But in another way, when you think that one element needs some HTML and some CSS somewhere else and some JavaScript somewhere else, and these three needs to be combined together to actually make the thing work, it's kind of nice to think in components as the concern. So this sidebar needs this markup, this JavaScript, and this CSS. And then this blog post title needs the same. And instead of having a separation of languages, which is kind of the traditional separation of concerns, documents, style, and behavior, you kind of have separation of concerns as separate components. And once you think this way, it also makes sense. Neither are wrong. I'm not saying that the separation of languages is wrong, but you can split your concerns in more than one way. So if you never leave your HTML, it also means you never go in a CSS file to write some CSS where you have to name a new class. So you do a blog post and you're like, okay, this is my blog post title. So, okay, I'll call it blog post -title. And then I'll go in the CSS, create this. And then there is like the intro text. So should I call it blog post.intro or intro text or excerpt or something? And you make all these little decisions that slow you down and make you think. Naming things is hard. And if you don't name them well, then it leads to problems later. So you have to take the time to name them well. So you don't leave HTML, you don't name things. And more importantly, all your changes have a local scope, because you're changing one bit of HTML that only renders either a component or a one-off something in a page. And you never run the chance of accidentally overriding something that the sidebar in the blog layout, which is completely like maybe you're working in the account setting in your dashboard, and then you accidentally overriding a property somewhere on the marketing side, which is in your head, it's not even there. And there's that thing where when you work with CSS, global CSS, I know there's different ways to scope it, but the traditional CSS approach, you kind of have to keep the context of the entire website in your head. So when you change something, I'm like, okay, is the specificity okay? Is it going to overwrite something? Where if you change your HTML, you only change this markup. There's never a chance to change anything anywhere else. So you have confidence and a super rapid workflow, which is like, before you try it, like I can speak about it as long as I want. Until you try it, you'll never realize how big of a deal that is. What do you think, John?
Yeah, pretty much every company that I've worked at has had some very complex way of dealing with basically just solving that like scoping issue. So they have these, insane ways that you need to name things so that there aren't any conflicts, and basically just, building a way to sidestep one of the features of CSS that is how it cascades and how it is meant to work like that. But that just doesn't really work for modern web development, because we want to design in these kinds of separate UIs or separate components within a UI. And so, yeah, having that kind of scoping side of things taken care of for me by the design, like the CSS framework that I'm using, is amazing.
Yep, totally. The next thing that's very useful is when you work with Tailwind or any utility-based approach, you essentially work within a restricted set of decisions. So it's like constraints-based design. That's the approach. So you've spent time upfront curating a list of spacing values and color values and font size values and shadow depth values and anything you can think of as a scale. This is essentially what Tailwind is at the core. It's like, hey, there's this really, really good designer and developer in Adam Wathan and Steve Sugar, and there's a few more people behind the product, but they've spent countless hours curating the best, in their opinion, looking scales for hierarchy of typography and colors and all these things. And you can think of you as a team, you would sit down with the design team and say, okay, let's come up with our design tokens for colors and what font sizes we use and what spacing scale we use and what shadows and all these things. That is what Tailwind is in a way. It's the starting point. It's like they call it an API for your design system. And in a way, it gives you predefined set of decisions that you should stick to. And it means that when you go on a given page, you're never like, I think I'm going to give this margin top 37 pixels because if I squint, it looks a little bit too small at 36 and 38 is too much. So you have all these magic values sprinkled in your CSS because you can just go in your CSS and add a value bespoke.
My nightmare is Z indexes or Z indices, I guess. But Z indexes around like having a system around how you do things that sit on top of each other. And so having these like different brackets of values that you can use for different things. So maybe, between 0 and 100 is like just text on the page, and then between 100 and 200 is like a button that floats on top of that, and between 200 and 300 is a modal or some kind of pop-up, and then within that you have all these magic numbers because you might need like a modal to display but then a button over the top of it, and so then it's like, well, this is the 352 value of Z index, and it's just insane the amount of nightmarish code I've seen around Z indexes still keeps me up at night.
And we all somehow end up at 9999999999999.
I just need this to be on top. How many nines can I put?
Almost, there's so many websites out there where you look at the dev tools and you can see these like 36 nines in a row. It's like someone really wanted to make sure that no one ever accidentally goes.
Yeah, someone was having a very frustrating end of their day and they just wanted to go home, enjoy their weekend, and this thing needed to be on top. Yeah.
And then you learn about the incredible isolate CSS property that I had no idea about until recently, until Adam added it to Tailwind. And shout out to Josh Como. If you know Josh Como, he does incredible courses and tutorials, and one of his blog posts is about this isolate property. And essentially, it lets you create a new stacking context, which is how Z-index kind of works. Usually, if you want to make sure that your layers stack in a good way, you use techniques like position relative because it resets a new stacking context. So there are different ways to force the browser to make a new context, but they all have some sort of side effect because they're not meant to do that. And isolate is the only purpose is create a new stacking context. So he's got a really cool example with an envelope and when you hover, it opens the envelope and the paper comes out. But as you can imagine, the back of the envelope should be in front of the paper coming out of it. But then the flip part that he opened should be behind. So there's these three layers. And he does it with Z-index and it works great until he puts that component somewhere where there's another element that has a Z-index value in between, and then half the envelope kind of disappears behind the banner. It's typical Z-index issues, and having this isolate property on the whole component means this is its own context and it's never going to be separated in the middle by something else. So that's a cool tip. And in Tailwind, you have this isolate utility class that kind of sets that. I thought I'd mention that in this discussion. Wow is the answer.
That is amazing.
I still don't really understand how it works, but you just apply it,
and that's the magic of Tailwind is you get these restricted set of good choices that have been made that include all of the cool things like that solve those kinds of weird edge cases.
I just realized I've demonstrated something that is commonly not thought about is you can learn CSS by using Tailwind. You hear, I don't want to derive too much, but you hear a lot like, oh, well, just learn CSS, like why use Tailwind as a crutch? And in a way, Tailwind helps you build UI rapidly, but you still need to know and understand CSS because unless you use something like Tailwind UI, which has pre-made UI components, it's just a set of utilities you have to compose yourself. And by doing this, you go to the docs and you learn about CSS. Like you need to know the name of the class in Tailwind, but most importantly, you need to know what that property does and when to use it. So I've learned so much about CSS by just doing tutorials and stuff about Tailwind and going into this less known, like margins and padding and colors is like the obvious stuff. But when you start looking at specific properties, you're like, wow, I'm actually learning. And I can imagine there's people not using Tailwind CSS that refer to the Tailwind CSS docs to learn about CSS properties because the docs are really good and it explains what each property does and with a visual example of when to use it. But Going back
And not
to
just
yeah,
Tailwind, not just
no, no,
CSS properties and learning CSS well, but just learning design well. Like I really like that they tend to use the more design terms for things that we call something else in CSS. So, what's the one that always catches me out? Is it letter spacing or something?
yes, letter spacing is called tracking.
Yeah, so things like that, where it's like it's using the correct like design term for that particular thing, rather than letter spacing, which only makes sense within CSS or within web
Yeah,
development. It's kind of trying to bring those break down the barrier between kind of development and design.
right. Yeah, that's a good point. You were asking about why is it good, and I talked about the speed and confidence of your workflow. I've talked about the decisions made for you, so you have a predefined set of values, which means your design has more consistency and less decisions. Again, not naming things, not fiddling around what value to use because you only have 6 or 8 or 20, whatever you chose values. This makes you fast and consistent. And then it makes you as the developer fast, but Tailwind also makes the browser and the client very fast. First thing is your CSS doesn't grow and creep. Typically, when you write custom CSS, you have one page, you have whatever, 27 kilobytes of CSS. You have 2 pages, you have 60 KB, and you have 600 pages, and you have 3 megs of. You keep writing new CSS. Even if you reuse BEM components really cleverly, there's more and more modifiers and new stuff. And basically, any new UIs requires new CSS. And when you use
Yeah,
Tailwind,
so the amount of
yeah,
times that that something like display flex, align item center, justify content center, the amount of times that those 3 rules would be repeated throughout your code
yeah,
would just be ridiculous. If you're using something like BEM, for people that aren't familiar, it stands for block element modifier, and so usually it basically enforces that you have unique names for everything. And so if you need a unique name for one of your components, like a header or something like that, and a button within your header, like if you do want to apply display flex and align things to the center,
yep,
that's going to have those 3 rules in there for that one component, but then there'll be something else on the page that also has those 3 rules, and something else that has those 3 rules, and so that those very common rules get repeated over and over and over and over and over throughout our code as we develop our application. And so naturally the size of that CSS file just grows and grows and grows and grows over time.
yep. And it feels less. It sneaks up on you, it creeps up on you because if when you have repetition in the HTML, people are very quick to say, hey, you need to clean that up. You can't leave like these unused bits of HTML or like comment it out. Like HTML is like kept very clean intentionally, where CSS, like no one really realized it's what you just described. Like you have display flex, like align item center, justify content, start or whatever. And you have this repetition everywhere. And I've seen Adam politely correct, or let's just get back to someone who said, I look at this HTML and I see 12 times the class flex. So you're just duplicating your stuff. And Adam's response was like, well, if you look at in your approach, that if you like challenging this, you would have 12 different classes that go display flex in them like you just described. And you don't realize that you're doing this until you realize that's the trade-off, the Fosbury approach. Like if there's 12 things doing flex, they're going to either do it in the CSS or the HTML. And in a way, I feel from my experience, it's easier to keep your HTML markup clean because that's what you work in and you're like consciously sending to the browser. Where CSS has that, just scroll to the bottom, add stuff. Don't touch this because I'm not really sure what it does. There's this. It's very easy to let the CSS room get messy. Like it's like the bedroom where no guest is ever gonna come. Where like the HTML is like the reception where you want everything make the first impression really well, and you tend to keep it clean. And to address that context of repetition, there's a thing called gzip, like compressing reusable bits of text, and essentially the computer can read a string like flex or justify center, and if it sees it again, it's like, oh, I know this one. I have a reference token for this, and it's just gonna reference to the first time it's been presented. So the more repetition you have, the more compressing and gzipping is effective. And when you use Tailwind, you end up having repetition in your HTML, but it compresses really well. And that's the thing I was mentioning in the Nicholas Gallagher article. He literally tried to do a site with just utility classes or like repetitive classes. And then he wrote a script to remove all the classes and then compare the size of the HTML, because one of the challenges is like you're bloating your HTML on every page, you can't cache it. And when you send it with that compression, there was like 40 kilobytes of difference, and you're like, oh yeah, that's maybe not great. But if gzip was enabled, and almost every server in the world, it's a server-side thing, if gzipping is enabled, the difference was at 1.1 kilobytes. So it was literally completely neglectable. So it kind of brushes off that argument, but also you have compression in the HTML, and then the way the CSS is written is very, by design, repetitive. So you have also extremely good compression on the CSS. So Tailwind actually zips really good on both sides and is actually almost always more performant than any other approach because of that aspect.
Okay, so the gzipping gets rid of that repetition, and our CSS doesn't grow over time because we're not adding those custom rules for every single piece of our UI. But doesn't that kind of flip it just flip it the reverse way, where when we first start developing our application, we're now including a huge CSS framework. We're basically including a huge CSS file that contains every single utility that could be used by Tailwind.
Yep. This is absolutely correct. And this is how Tailwind started until it became a problem. Like, that don't abstract things too early before they become a real problem. So Tailwind started with like only a curated set of colors and font sizes and spacing scale. And then there was lots of what's called core plugins, like something not always used that you could, or variants that you could go and enable if you needed them. Like some weird cases where you want hover and active states, or like the hover state would only be applied to background colors or text colors or stuff that you typically change on color. It wouldn't be applied like on width because it's less often that you change the width of something on hover. And so there was a lot of thinking on, okay, we don't want to generate too much CSS. So what is a usable set of base standards that people can be productive with, and then they can enable stuff. And then when someone wanted to add a color, if you just added a primary turquoise color, it's one class, one line in the config file, but it generates the text color, primary turquoise, the background color, the border color, the gradient color, the border top color. There's so many permutation of that color that get generated, and then all the variants on hover and all that. And quickly it got to a point where Tailwind CSS became hard to use, because even if it's performant, you were generating, especially if people added more values to the config file, you were generating 2, 3, 4 megs of CSS. This is not a problem for production ever, because this would be removed at a step that's called purge, where you can flush out all the classes you haven't used. But it became a problem at dev time. Like, unless you had this M1 beef machine, you would start choking. Like, the browser can only process that much CSS, and at some point the dev tools would start being very laggy, and a lot of people opened issues saying, I can't use it. It's just like, I have to comment out half the utilities because it's just too much. And so to address this, Tailwind, since version 3, it started in version 2 as an experiment, and in version 3, it flipped the whole approach of generate all the utility classes for all the permutations that you would like to do, and then flush it out, purge it out just before production. It changed this to, no, we're going to go from the start, only generates what you're actually using. And that's what's called like just-in-time compilation. So Tailwind is only going to generate CSS when you use it somewhere in a template. And it comes with one new requirement, which you have to tell Tailwind where you're going to use Tailwind classes. Otherwise, it would have to scan all your node modules and everything in directory. So in the config file, there's that little content array. And you can say anything in the src/pages directory with any file extension, please look at this because I might use Tailwind classes. And maybe there's just the index.html file as well on the body class. On the body tag, I want a Tailwind class. So you add this to your config. And you do that at the start. And then no matter what you do with Tailwind, it's very, very challenging to get a CSS file that's ever bigger than 10, 15 kilobytes, because it's only going to generate what you use, and you tend to reuse the same utilities on things because they're like a set of restrictions. And this becomes now at dev time and at build time and anywhere like an incredibly small footprint. You essentially start with zero CSS. It's not true because it sets some CSS variables, but you start with an absolute minimum baseline. And then as you build UIs, you generate the CSS that it needs to work. And you never have to think about it. And it means Tailwind now enables all the colors, all the variants, all the combination of variants. You can add as many functionality as you want. You can write a plugin that enhances what CSS does. You can just add more properties that don't exist. And if you don't use them in your template, it's not even going to generate the CSS. So you can say, give me all the options under the sun. I want total flexibility. But again, you should stick to constraints to have this design consistency, but you can enable everything. So it makes the whole maintaining a Tailwind project easier because you don't have to think, what should I enable? Should I fine tune, maybe comment out these things I don't use? You just like fire hose everything out there, and it only generates it in the CSS if you use it. And
yeah, I think that was the game changer for me deciding to start using Tailwind. Was initially I had that perception of like, well, if I use Tailwind but I only use, the padding classes and some margin bottom or whatever, then I'm just including this huge library, which was the case with like something like Bootstrap. So I think Bootstrap 4 moved to a kind of utility first style of building it, but you still just include the whole script. So every single class in that Bootstrap library. Whereas, when Tailwind made it so that basically it was just purging everything that wasn't actually used and taking care of that performance side for me, I was like, ooh, okay, this makes sense now. I like this.
That was really marking a game-changing pivotal point in... There's so many times, and I was part of the core team for this whole period, we were like, that would be awesome to add individual border utilities for just border top, or someone wanted vertical borders like border Y for top and bottom, and border X for left and right. And the thing is, like I said before, borders generate colors for each border, and just adding these little utilities created maybe 64 or maybe 256 or 10. I don't even know how many permutations of utilities. And therefore, there was always this kind of the desire to just take it easy. Let's not push it because we generate all these classes for everyone who doesn't need to use it. And as soon as it flipped to the just-in-time compilation, it's completely a non-problem. You can just enable everything that is useful that you might want to use ever. So there's all these variants in Tailwind, like hover, focus, group focus, active, like any state where an element can be in. And now the just-in-time engine is so clever that you can combine and chain any permutations of these possible states, and it will generate the exact class that makes it work. And so you can make things that are absolutely useless, but if you needed to use it, like when you hover this and then the parent with the new selectors like is, has, all like some of it is not out in browser completely, but you can make absolute crazy selectors and everything will generate just the right CSS you need. So I think we just need, before we talk about this, we need to rewind a little bit. And I just want to explain that Tailwind CSS at the core is a post-CSS plugin. So it kind of requires a build step and people shy away from that. But basically post-CSS is something that takes an input that is kind of invalid CSS or CSS with weird additions, and then it transforms it into a valid CSS output. And one thing that everyone uses without realizing is Auto Prefixer. So Auto Prefixer is a post-CSS plugin. And it takes you CSS and it's like, oh, this thing needs the Moz and the Microsoft, I forgot, there's all these vendor prefixes for different WebKits and different browser engines. And Auto Prefixer just checks the can I use site and all that, like what needs to be prefixed, vendor prefixed, and then progressively removes them as you don't need them, and it does all this hard work for you. So if you use Auto Prefixer, which you very likely do, you can already use post CSS. And so if you want to use Tailwind, all you need is find a way to process this post CSS. If you use Webpack or Vite or any of these build steps, build tools, they almost all support post CSS. So all you have to do is have a post CSS config file which uses auto prefixer and Tailwind plus anything else you would do. And Tailwind lets you generate that with the CLI command. You go npx Tailwind CSS init-p for post CSS config, and it's there, it appears there, and it will start working. And if you're not using a build step, like you might have a project, you just have an index.html file and you want to build something, and like, I don't need Webpack, I don't need Vite, I don't need anything, I just want just an index.html file. Well, Tailwind comes with its own CLI, and so you can say, you don't even need an entry point. Like if you want a CSS file, you can use it and it's going to take this. If you don't, it's going to take the default Tailwind, which is like the base layer, the components and utilities. It comes out of the box. And all you do is you run a little script that says npx Tailwind CSS, and you go -o for output or --output, and you say where do you want that file to be generated. You say, I just need a file. I have an index.html file, and I need a file called styles.css. So you write the script and you say output styles.css. And then you can add a little watch flag -w. And then you press enter, and it's going to constantly watch for changes and regenerate the CSS for you. So with a one-liner that you can put in the scripts, you can have an npm script that does this. You now have like the whole processing of Tailwind happening for you. You don't need post CSS. You don't even need to install Tailwind locally. You just need to run that CLI script. And the other thing that you need to do, like I said before, is the content configuration. You need to tell Tailwind what files to look for. So if you try Tailwind for the first time and it's not generating any CSS, 99% chance is you haven't told it what to look for. So any file where you have a Tailwind class, you put it in there and you run that script, and you now have an index file and an incredibly powerful CSS generator that will only generate what you use. And it's like, takes 1 minute to set up, and it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I remember that, a little while ago, people were a bit hesitant about having like a build system around their web projects. Needing to have like a build step was kind of this negative thing. But it turns out that build steps allow us to do really convenient things in our like authoring side of the code. And turns out like minifying and like doing all the turning it into the best possible version that the browser can see. Turns out humans are really bad at doing that, and computers are really, really good at doing that. And I think we used to live in a world where we didn't necessarily have build steps for our web applications, but now like you look at if you're building with any framework like React, Vue, Svelte, anything Angular, any kind of web framework that you're building already has that build step there. It's already using something like Vite or Webpack or something to run some build process. And so because Tailwind is kind of becoming that kind of industry standard for styling, there's obviously really, really easy ways to integrate it with all of those common web frameworks that are out there.
Yeah, totally. And what you touched on is right. It works everywhere, but there was that thing like, but I don't want to use Webpack or React or Vue or Svelte. Sometimes like I'm either PHP or even just like I have this simple site. I just want to open an index.html file and nothing else. And for them, for these case scenarios, it was a little bit of a pain of like figuring out how to have a post CSS pipeline running. And so there was always that like, oh, it's kind of like there's a bit of setup. Maybe I just use Bootstrap because I just have a link tag and that's it. And so the CLI in these conditions is incredible because it does that. You literally have to write one line that says, where do you want to generate Tailwind, and have the config file. And if you don't want a config file, you can pass the content array in the little CLI script. So you literally have nothing to do. You can copy that somewhere in your clipboard, and every new project you paste that line in the terminal or in the package.json file or whatever you want to do. And it's like for super simple landing page projects, sometimes it's the way to go. And it's worth noting that when you run the CLI script with -p for production, I think it is, it will, it's -- minify or -m, and then it's going to minify the output. So you don't have to, oh, now I need CSS Nano or something to remove the comments and the spaces. You can, the Tailwind CLI helps you at dev time and also for production. It's super cool. And
Cool.
one more thing,
Okay.
one more thing that makes Tailwind unique, or the approach unique, is it works everywhere because it's only CSS. Like there's the whole build step and it's post CSS and stuff. But what you ship, what you generate at build time is just CSS. So a lot of people say, yeah, but style components is super cool and style system or like Chakra UI have this really nice same approach where you have a set of predefined spacing values, but you pass them as props in the React or Vue approach. And then what happens if the company also has a WordPress blog, which is very more common than you think? Like the blog runs on WordPress or something different, like a Ruby on Rails app. If you buy in this React or specific framework only approach, you kind of like shoehorn, and you kind of like, shoehorn is not the right word, but you kind of scoped to that environment only. And if you've built a whole application with something that uses React props as styling approach, or even something like Emotion, which I love, but you have like a CSS prop where you pass a CSS in JS object, the WordPress seems like I can't use any of that. We have to rebuild everything with the classes. And but the other thing, the reverse is not right. So if you use traditional CSS like Tailwind on your WordPress site, you can 100% copy and paste the classes to a React app and it's going to work everywhere. Anywhere that can read CSS, which is the browser, like that's what they do, it's going to work. So there's that thing where you don't have any runtime. So performance-wise, it's like generated ahead of time. It's gzipped, it's minimal. I actually just now think that many times I thought, why don't I just inline the whole output into the page? Because it's almost always going to be less than 14 kilobytes, which is the limit I think you can have in your document head. And like this critical CSS, like you're supposed to move the CSS that should render straight away before when the page loads. You should move this critical CSS inline in the document head so it's available right at the start. And I'm like, dude, the entire output of CSS on any projects I've worked would fit in there. And I heard the Shop Talk Show episode the other day where they were talking about the whole idea of having a file.css file in a link tag is almost like a bad idea, because if you can, everything should come like inline if it's small enough. And I was like, in the projects I built, like I've never seen Tailwind reach higher than 10K. So technically that should work. So yeah, it works everywhere.
Absolutely. So it working everywhere is a huge benefit. I remember at one of the companies I worked at, it was kind of built, the initial app was built on Rails. And then obviously with the success of React, everyone wanted to move to replacing the Vue part of
the ERB templates.
The ERB templates with React. And so there was a project that allowed you to write your views in React. So that was kind of like, well, yeah, as you said before, shoehorned into the project. And then style components took off, and that was like a really cool thing to do all your styling in. And so then it was like, oh, okay, let's work out a way to make style components work within this React that's working within this Rails app. And like eventually, like writing the code was fine, but there was just this like awful glue layer that just had like everything stitched together in this awful way. And so it's awesome that with Tailwind you just don't have that problem, because it just runs anywhere. And so you can just include that CSS file, and you could write your templates in ERB, or you could write them in React or whatever you want. So what are your favorite, most killer features of Tailwind CSS?
The number one by far is that whole just-in-time compilation that we've talked about. It opens up the whole game. It completely negates the whole, but you deal with these big files at dev time, so it's slow. And if you forget to purge, like that was the other thing. Some people would ship the dev CSS without running it through purge. So, and again, that's where Twitter screenshots these 3 megs of CSS and then drags it. And I don't want to name names, but it's very common to see someone very, very prominent in the industry have a hot take like, why are we shipping 3 megabytes of CSS to the browser? This is not how it should be. and then completely bag and dunk on Tailwind, and then never answer any of the comments saying, "Did you know you can do this and this and that?" And there's countless. It's a bit frustrating when you know that how good it's been thought of, and then how people just decide to, out of context, take one screenshot and say, yeah, and then you can't reach out to them and say, hey, can I explain to you how it actually works? And of course, this is not great, but this is not how it's supposed to be used. Anyway, Just in Time opens that, and it opens an incredible amount of potential, like I mentioned, combining different variants, but also now there's this crazy logic that lets you create arbitrary values, which means if you need the one-off value that doesn't exist in your predefined set of decisions, most of the time you should stick to it. But if you want a one-off bespoke, you have a blob, like a nice little pastel color blob that you want absolutely positioned on the corner of your image, it sucks to go in the config file and create a new with a blob spacing utility that you only use for that blob, because you've created that thing you're never going to reuse. And then when you look at the HTML, it doesn't stand out as a one-off bespoke stuff. So arbitrary values lets you use a square bracket syntax and pass any value you can think of. So you could have position top instead of going -8 or +6 in the scale that's pretty fine. You could say -117 pixels. Or you could say minus calc 117 pixels minus theme spacing padding 8. Like you could do anything that you can think of that kind of describes the reflection. Why is this positioned here? And this is one thing when I teach. I did the Tailwind CSS workshop. We build on this ribbon that kind of uses an arbitrary values, which is a very specific value. And it's 141.42%. And just putting that value by itself, it kind of doesn't make sense. But you can kind of describe how you arrive to this decision with these arbitrary values. And it means you don't write a reusable class that you're never going to reuse. It just opens up so many possibilities. And so arbitrary values are just for the value of a certain property. But there's also arbitrary properties, which means you can use... the other day, Jen Simmons did a really cool demo of the has modifier or pseudo-LM. I don't even know how it's called. And she was like, if there's a grid and if one of the grid cells has an image, I want this to use 2 grid cells, 3 grid rows and 2 grid columns. So it was defining every child as just one cell. But then it said has image, and it said col span 2, col row span 2. So it said explicitly, if you have an image, use 2 rows and 2 columns. And then in Tailwind, I was like, I can generate this exact utility with arbitrary values without writing any CSS. Not that it's the best approach, but I redid the demo without ever leaving the HTML. And I did some @supports check. I had a fallback for this. I've never used it before that demo, for the P3 display colors, which is the new color range, which is much brighter than the web standard colors. And I was like, I can do all of this by writing the CSS directly in the HTML. So if you thought writing utility classes with presentational concerns was triggering people, now you can write CSS, anything that Tailwind doesn't support, but it actually does. Like in 1 year, there would be a new property that no one heard about, and it would work. It's already supported now because you can write the CSS inside square brackets. And
that's so cool.
It's
so it gives you like a little escape hatch to break out of Tailwind. Well, I guess that's what the square brackets are. It's like actually a little hatch that you can push through, and you can go and do anything that you want outside what is like natively supported by Tailwind. That is very cool.
It's still just CSS, so you can have hover. It's not an inline style that's gonna just steamroll everything else. You can have hover state. You can use CSS variables inside that thing. Like it's completely amazing how powerful it is. And the demo I did, I was preventing myself from being attacked by saying, I'm not saying this is how you should do the whole page, but just as an example of how powerful it is, I've added has and display P3 stuff that only works in Safari and like certain browsers right now. And then I did an @ supports to check for these features, and I displayed a banner that says you should use a browser that supports these features. That only shows it only shows conditionally if they're not supported. So that was what Jen Simmons' example had, and I was able to do all of this inside the HTML, which is nuts. And yeah, so the killer feature is arbitrary values, arbitrary properties, and also arbitrary variants. So you can that's the variant is something like has is like a state selector, I guess, and then so that's what falls into the variants category in Tailwind, like hover, active, group hover. So you can generate almost anything that you want, and with great power comes great responsibility. You shouldn't go too crazy with that, but the fact you can do it even for prototyping without, again, you don't leave your HTML, you're like designing something and you're super excited and you try stuff instead of, oh, let's go in the config file and enable a new possibility. You just do it there. And then if you feel like you like it and you use it again, you can promote it to a new config value. And that's really good. And I'm going to take a breath, and then I'm going to talk about my next killer feature, and it is the plugin API. So Tailwind has this capability to extend the functionality with JavaScript. But again, you write JavaScript for the authoring experience, but it generates CSS at the end of the day. It's not like you use JavaScript to do crazy stuff in the browser, but you can say, I'm going to create a completely new thing. Like one of my workshops, I keep plugging them, but why not, is let's add support for multiple themes, color themes, where you use CSS variables to define the color, and then you create scoped selectors that kind of flip the value of this variable. And so by using the plugin API, first of all, you can use JavaScript to, let's say you receive a hex color, but you want the RGB value. So you could do the manual conversion, but you can also write some JavaScript that converts the color, and then that loops over the values you pass as an object and generates a CSS variable and a Tailwind utility class for each. And then, so you have the full power of JavaScript to generate stuff. And also then you can reuse it across any Tailwind project. You just go in the config file, and there's a plugins array at the bottom, and you just require the plugin that you wrote somewhere, and you add it, and it injects all the functionality that you want. So instead of doing your work in the CSS file, and then you have to copy and paste across project, you can bundle this thing, you can put it on NPM, and then people, Shruti Basala, I think that's her name. Sorry if I mispronounced it. She's an awesome content creator. She does lots of stuff about YouTube, on YouTube about Tailwind, and she created a CSS grid plugin on NPM, and it uses this min-max value, which kind of makes responsive grids a one-liner. So it's like, it's minimum 150 pixels per cell, and then it just, when there's space, you just stack them sideways. So with one class, you have the full responsive grid. And then Shruti added some values for the min value. So is it 150, 200, 250, 300? And with the opportunity to add more values in your config. And that's a perfect example of like extending the functionality of Tailwind. You just require this plugin. If you're happy with the default values, that's it, you're done. And if you want specific for your project values, you extend the theme object or the options that you pass to the plugin, and boom, you have this, and you can use it in every single project. And because it all happens at build time, again, it's not like you have this, like you bring in, like in my workshop, I use a color transformation from hex to RGB by Syndrasaurus, which is like, it's a small library, but I don't even have to think, what do I add to the bundle size? Because it all happens, it never makes it to the browser. It's like the Tailwind plugin is built with Node.js at dev time, and then it generates the CSS, and the CSS file makes it to the browser. Doesn't matter, I could use Moment.js and the whole Lodash and anything I want, because nothing gets brought in the browser. So it's super cool to have that possibility to do advanced stuff, calculations, and then generate CSS, and that's the output. That's the other killer feature.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't think I've ever used the plugins API unless I've just copied and pasted something from somewhere. Yeah. Simon, take a sip of water.
Can you hear
clear your throat? I'll take over. I can hear that it's starting to break up, and I'm feeling bad not jumping in and stopping you. So I can
You
I can
can't stop
edit
me
this
when I
part.
talk about Tailwind. You know that.
No, you just keep going. It's great. All right, so I'm going to take over and talk about I'm going to steal your killer
Please.
features of it being the nice default colors and scales and the best-in-class documentation. While you rest your voice for a second, and then you can jump back in with the
Sweet.
next
Sounds
section.
good.
All right. So I would say my favorite killer features of using Tailwind. Obviously, I haven't used it as in depth as you have, but just the things that have stood out to me as more of a beginner with Tailwind is just how awesome the colors and scales are. Like, I don't think I've ever actually pushed outside of like, I know you can define your own colors and your own scales and everything, and basically build your own design system with Tailwind. But I think the default ones that Adam and the team have put together are just like, they just
It's
work.
so good.
I feel like, yeah, I just don't think about colors, and it's not just like the overall theme for my site, but like colors that work together. And so if I'm using a particular like blue, and then so let's say like background blue 200 or something like that, and then I use a like a red of 200 or a pink of 200, like they all kind of just work so nicely together. And when you do, use those margin bottoms or different font sizes, those different scaled fonts, everything just looks right. Like, they've obviously put so much work into meticulously designing this perfect system around colors and scales. I suspect Adam and others have probably spent a lot of time working either as designers or with designers.
I can tell you for fact, I was preparing all the videos for what's new in Tailwind CSS version 3. That's like a few weeks before we launched Tailwind 3. And Steve kept saying, oh, don't do the colors video just yet because I'm still like tinkering with it. And yeah, Steve mostly, but Adam as well, spent multiple weeks obsessing about the color palette, just that. So imagine someone of Steve's caliber of skills spending weeks like doing research. What is everyone doing? What is Polaris at Shopify doing? Like, just looking at everything in the industry and obsessing about what is the best color palette. That's the amount of work that went into it. And I think that's why I agree with what you said. I almost never build a new custom color or font size. You can just use the defaults of Tailwind and you have this incredibly well curated set. And it doesn't mean all your sites are going to look the same. Some people notice like the indigo because it's overused. It's like Tailwind UI's base color. So I can recognize indigo 600 like from miles away. And that's my favorite color. But like, you can still make sites look completely different without touching the default design tokens, which is amazing.
Yeah, I always feel like even if I just want one custom color that that I've decided is the right color for my site, I know that if I just like chuck that in there, it's just going to break all of the other like beautiful color design that's gone into it. And so I always end up just being like, I'll just use the one that's close enough.
Yeah, it's also probably there's one of them that's very close already. And it's like, oh, wow, this is exactly what I wanted. It covers like this, I don't know how many, 13, 12 colors, maybe more. And then 4 different grays. So like, it's like, what's a little slice of the color wheel should I add something? They're all kind of like very well covered.
Yeah, that's actually something that I love as well, is just designing like a dark mode theme with Tailwind, because like, it's not like you have black and then you have every shade of gray. Like there are just so many little variants that just work so well together for just adding like a little highlight to something in dark mode. Yeah, it's very nice. The other thing that really stands out to me while learning Tailwind CSS is just like the best in class documentation. Oh, sorry, Leonardo.
Sorry, I just put Leonardo. This. He likes the slate. So slate is a slightly blue tint of the gray. The grays go from bluish, which is cool, to reddish, which is warm. And slate is that nice, like charcoal, bluish gray. And that's also my go-to. Like all the Pro Tailwind stuff, materials I've done, I use that, especially if you use indigo or purple or blue, like it feels really nice. It's got that nice crisp color. So I 100% back up this comment.
Totally. So the other thing that I think I really enjoy, or that I've really benefited from Tailwind, that's probably one of the most important things about Tailwind, is just the best in class documentation.
Right.
It's obviously had a whole bunch of work put into it, especially just like the Command K searching. Like anytime I've ever looked for anything, I've always found it. Like it's never been I've had to dig too far into something. If I'm looking for like how do I increase the font weight or whatever, it's always the first result, and
Yeah.
super easy to find. So it's very very impressive, and just obviously every single part of the entire framework is just it's all there. It just anything that I need to know how to do, I can find very very quickly. So the documentation is one side of that, which is just amazing, but then the other side of that is obviously like just content that's out there, and world class screencasts that have been made about Tailwind by particular people from the Tailwind community or the Tailwind team. Do you want to tell us about those, Simon?
Yes. So I thought that might be an interesting part to talk about is my experience being part of the Tailwind Labs core team. So I imagine most people listening to this know me from the work I've done for Tailwind Labs and the videos. And the slides you've seen before about me talking about tachyons, which was like even before, I've always been, I think Adam, when the day I started, he said Simon was carrying the flag of utility first even before Tailwind existed. And that's kind of my path of life ended up leading to me having the opportunity to work with the Tailwind team, which was incredible. So yeah, I just thought I'd talk about this a bit. So it's been an incredible opportunity for me. Saying that, I totally deserved it. I converted my fair share of devs to Tailwind CSS since day one. And still now, the talk that you've seen a few slides from, it's a talk I gave in Berlin in 2018. Just Tailwind was out for like half a year or maybe a whole year, but the story it tells is from 2 years before, like or a year and a half before. And still now, so I did that talk 4 years ago, and still now random people say, I just discovered that talk, and this is the one thing that I've been rejecting the idea, and I watched your talk, and now I'm completely sold. Like I see the light. And
you definitely convinced me to get started with Tailwind, so there's another tick there.
There you go. And that's why I try to frame these episodes the same way, where I go through the journey a little bit, and I know what you're going to feel at the start, and try to address this. In a way, that's what the Tailwind docs do. It's controversial, but Adam says like, I know what you think. This is horrible. You're gonna have a gag reflex and stuff, but I promise you, if you give it a try, you might never, like, you might consider how would I go back to doing things differently. And it's super hard, because if you don't explain why, people drag you, and if you explain why it takes too much time, etc. Anyway, I ended up working at Tailwind Labs, which was awesome. I was able to pitch my dream job. Like, I started by doing some Tailwind UI components for Tailwind UI. And then Adam said, hey, what's like your dream job at Tailwind Labs? What will it look like? And I was like, I think I'm really good at making videos. I like to teach people. I used to be a school teacher. I want to try make some video content. So I didn't exactly start as a dev role, but I kind of started with the prospect so that I could be one. And Adam said, you know what, let's do a refresh of my Tailwind 0 to production course, because it's a bit outdated. Try do 6-8 videos on that, and then see what happens. And we'll create a new YouTube channel with these videos. And we did that in January 21, I think. And yeah, well, it went really well, and we did the YouTube channel, and it really took off. And then Adam said, dude, like, if you want to do that full time, let's go for it, and you can become like the YouTube resident at Tailwind Labs. And so I got to pitch my dream job, and obviously I had incredible personal growth in terms of like full-time video editing, and just putting yourself out there as a brand, like the face of Tailwind, is an incredible way to personally like move to the next echelon in what like the reach that I can have, which is amazing. And working with a high-performing team like Tailwind Labs has is amazing. Like there's 5, 6, 7, maybe 8. I don't even know exactly now, but it's a really small team. And we were shipping stuff all the time, and there's no politics, no meetings, no red tape. Like there's that work cycle, 6-week work cycle borrowed from the folks at Basecamp that's in place. And Adam, if you like the Tailwind docs, the copywriting, this is like almost everything is Adam, and he puts the same level of detail and passion in explaining what the next work cycle is and what people should work on. And basically, he would ask us during the current cycle, what do you think you would do next? And then just present that. And then people just go and do their thing and try to own the part of the business that they're working on, which is amazing. And the last thing that was amazing that carries on. So I'm no longer at Tailwind Labs now, but I got to keep like an incredible amount of gear that I acquired through making these videos. I spent a lot of my own money as well to buy stuff that I felt improved my workflow. Like if you're a professional, you want to invest in good tools. But if anything, just the M1 Max, maxed out M1 Max, just that machine is like significant price. And the fact that Adam never said, hey, can you send everything back and stuff was pretty amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And I imagine this was like that time kind of overlaps with when COVID was starting to become a thing. And so, it must have been like, I think at the time, at least in my experience, a lot of that kind of dev rel position was requiring people to travel around a lot, which may not have been so possible. And so them specifically looking at like upgrading their their YouTube content and doing all of this stuff that you could do like remotely and mostly asynchronously, maybe, I imagine would have been like the perfect timing for all of those things to have lined up. But I'm sure it wasn't all smooth sailing and pros. What were some of the cons of your experience?
So what you said is exactly right. I joined in 2020 in July, which is like the peak of, at least in Australia, that was like we were right in the first lockdown, and I think the whole world was in lockdown at this point. So it's a double-edged word, because I lived in a small apartment house that's called, in Australia, it's called a granny flat. So it's someone builds a smaller house in their backyard and then they rent it out, or they have the granny, the grandma that lives in, it's like for family or visits, or just have a rental income. And we literally moved in that place before COVID was even a thing. And we were like, it's small, but we always outside. We go camping, we play sports. We never at the house. So who cares? And I was working with ThinkMill back then, and I was contracting for Atlassian. So all I needed was a little laptop, and I didn't do any video or anything. And then I started with Tailwind Labs, and COVID hit, and homeschooling with the kids in that small place. And when I started making videos, it became really challenging because I did not have an office. Like I was working in the living room, like at the dining table or whatever, which is, when you have a laptop, it's fine. You just sit there, work there, and then pack the laptop. And then when I started getting lights and a DSLR camera and all that stuff, I was like, there is no way with kids I'm going to leave this on tripods in the living room. Like it's not going to survive one night. So I would pack up my studio, almost like a roadie that goes on the set to film just one scene and just set all the tripods and stuff. So work-wise, it was pretty hard. And that's one thing that it's not really related to Tailwind Labs. The thing that's related is most of the team is in Canada or Europe. And the job was initially designed to be completely asynchronous. Like we would catch up with Adam once every month, and then sometimes with Steve as well. And the whole idea is like everyone knows what they're working on, and it doesn't really require a lot of like pairing and like back and forth. Like we talk about what we would like to do for the next 6 weeks, and then Simon goes and does his thing, and the other people do their thing, and then we kind of own that part of the business. And that works really well. But at some point, I think as the team grew just a little bit more, like because I was the second hire, so there was Steve, Adam, and there was another person called Brad working there already, and then I was a second employee hire. So we were just 4, and we literally everyone owned that little parts. And the team grew while I was there from 4 to 8 or 7, I think. And you might think it's still doubling, and it means just a little bit more things and decisions. And like there's that graph of the reports between people. If you have 4, it's just like a cross. And then you have 5, and it's like this big hexagon, but with lines between each individuals. And so the lines like exponentially grow every time you add a person. And Tailwind as a company, and it's not a dig at all, they moved towards a let's work synchronously, and the culture of working is to pair. And then started to have some friction in a way that I was asked to try to use the time zone overlap, which from Australia to Europe or Canada is basically from 5 a.m. till 7 a.m. or from 10 p.m. to midnight. Like it's or both, and then you take a break in between. But it shifted from Simon does his thing by himself to we're a bit more sophisticated and we need more like interaction. Like if you look at the YouTube channel, the first video, I was doing the design and I was recording it and then showing to Adam, and he was like, yeah, this is great. Maybe just change the way you say that sentence or use a button instead of a div, or like some mistakes that I did. But then it's turned into, go back to the YouTube channel and look at the very old one. They're like 1 minute, I don't have my face on the camera. It's simple and it's very efficient. And then it progressively moved into this like full-blown production, which I love because I upped my game so much. But what you mentioned before about the quality of the documentation and every single thing Tailwind Labs does is like it's like absolute perfection. Like it's amazing. And in a way, talking with Adam and Jonathan and other people, they were like, in a way, Simon, you are the face, the public front window of Tailwind CSS. A lot of people discover Tailwind through you. And so everything you put out needs to reflect that level of attention to details and perfection, even more than like if we have a typo in the documentation, someone does a PR and fixes it. If there's a typo in the video, it might be perceived as like, it damages that absolute perfection quality. Like someone might one day screenshot, say, "Aha, look, there's two N's instead of one M." And so all this, like you said, it's a beautiful opportunity, but it was also pretty stressful because there's that expectation of literally non-human quality. And I think if I was in the same time zone and I could just constantly say, "Hey, I'm a bit tired. Can you just review this before I export it?" But I was literally working on my own in my own time zone, and a couple of times something slipped through the crack because you work like 8 hours straight on editing, and you forget that you left a clip there that you're gonna go. So even the problem is some videos were like 15 or even 30 minutes long. So doing a review process, just watching the whole video for like the final review, and pausing to check if there's a typo in the text or in the titles. It would take me sometimes half a day just to review. And so it became like more and more production. And speaking from what, like, I just want to be clear with one thing. I didn't quit the job. Tailwind Labs decided that to part ways, which is fine. I understand. But one of the discussions we had is it required too much input and time from the other people from the team to kind of help me bring the thing where I want it to be or where they want it to be. And I think a lot of it could be fixed with the time zone. So
it's hard with like it being like that being the bottleneck. Like you're saying that like you were the kind of most public thing that represented the brand, and that obviously creates like a big bottleneck where that needs to be like really meticulously reviewed. And yeah, that wouldn't be a problem if you were like sitting next to someone or even just in the same time zone and you're just like, hey, can we quickly jump on a call to talk about this thing? But when you add those like additional turnarounds of like potentially another day because you're asleep at the time when someone sends a comment saying, hey, can you change this? And then you wake up and then you change it and then you send to the reviewed version, and then again someone needs to review it when they're awake. Like it just it really blows out those times, and needing to have so much time pairing and kind of like touching base with so many people in the company is such a byproduct of that exact size of company. Like when it's smaller, you're completely autonomous and you can do everything by yourself because there's not enough people to even review stuff. It's just like you just got to keep running forward because it's just, you're that size. And once you get big enough, you have more of a management structure where like you maybe only need to catch up with your manager and you can work out a time that's convenient for that. But when you're in that like that sweet spot that Tailwind was at, right, when you were there, you have that kind of like that necessity to catch up with everyone individually or to pair with different people in different time zones. Without, being either side of that. Yeah. It's
Now, I
challenging.
just want to stress to make it really clear. I understand the decision. Of course, I wasn't happy or excited, and I kind of didn't see it completely coming. But I'm still in good terms. Like I speak to Adam every now and then, and it's not one of these really nasty. And one thing that Adam said when we had that discussion right after, basically telling me that this is the end of the road. He said, I feel like you could find another position with your talent and skill where people can provide better support and give you better working conditions. So there was like, I saw it as like, I'm not delivering the level of expectation, but there's also, they as a team need to focus on so many other things. And maybe it would have been more productive if I had a whole DevRel team where I can like pair like just someone like you, John. Just like
And
have
that's
someone
why we have the Navbar podcast now. You work full time at the Navbar.
at the nav bar. Yeah. Yeah. Just having some ideas to bounce off someone in my time zone, and just I didn't realize that the working conditions were really rough for me. And it's when I stopped, and I thought I'd just take a break to just reflect on what I want to do next and stuff. And it hit me like a brick. First of all, I caught COVID the week after, which wasn't great. And it stayed with me for a bit, but I literally burnt out. Like taking a break is what allowed the release of all the stress and like working hours and intensity and anxiety to leave one time. Like I would have dreams of like, what if I leave a typo in this thing and I didn't see it? And we've talked about the importance of not doing this. And so when it went away and I took a break, that's when it hit me, and I went into this like nosediving of like exhaustion and not depression, but like burnout. And I hate tech, and I wanna be a potato farmer and have corgis and move to a farm and all that stuff, which half of these things I've done. But I'm happy to say that I kind of came back the other side and spent time thinking about it, and I realized Adam was right. Like it's they from that specific time zone. As much as I am a promoter of remote work and async work, in that context with the expectations of quality and timelines and stuff, it wasn't the best working conditions for me. But I'm really grateful for the opportunity. It's been a wild ride for sure, but it's definitely helped me reach a new status in the DevRel world. Like I feel like DevRel is one of the hottest position you can be in, like in terms of in demand and upcoming. And then the amount of time that I've seen discussions about like people say, hey, who are some good DevRels or whatever? And people refer to me and they're like, he's the standard of like video production quality. And I'm like, it's wild. Like I'm this little guy from Switzerland who moved to Australia and now am considered like one of the really good people doing stuff even in the United States, which is like a country with thousands of really, really good developers. So yeah, I'm really happy. And yeah, I'm always happy to answer questions. I really enjoy the whole process, and I would absolutely do it again. And I think one thing that is a huge testament to Tailwind CSS is, to be frank, I got fired from the team, and I'm still here holding the Tailwind CSS flag and being like, guys, this is amazing. You should use it. And I'm still, I would never, if I have the choice myself, I would never pick anything else than Tailwind to start a new project. And I'm betting on myself now, trying to make my own content and course. And I picked Tailwind CSS because that's the thing I'm passionate about the most. So if you thought I was paid by Tailwind Labs to say it's cool, just know I'm not paid by Tailwind Labs, and I still say that it's cool. So that's a pretty good testimonial that it's genuine and authentic recommendations, I guess.
They should put that on the website. They should have testimonials and just Simon's face. I got fired from Tailwind, but I still think it's cool.
I've spoken a lot. If you have questions, you being John or you being in the comments, I'm very happy to answer. I feel like we've covered a lot of what Tailwind is, what is my relationship with Tailwind. Do you have anything specific that you would like to know or that you've faced as a problem, and maybe I can help you?
Well, not specifically a question, but I guess maybe just like quickly going through my experience with Tailwind from being on the other side of it, obviously having nothing to do with the core team and just being a consumer of Tailwind. I think I went through basically the exact process that you described there of like, looking at it, feeling like this isn't right, kind of being a bit anti-Tailwind, and then giving it a try at some point and being like, oh, there's some good stuff and some bad stuff, and then using it more and then being like, oh, this is awesome, and it all clicks. Like I think I went through that exact flow. Like initially I didn't really understand like how it was different to inline styles, and I had that like that really kind of like bad taste in my mouth about using inline styles and all of the problems that happen there. And so like I didn't understand how it was any different, because I didn't fully understand all of the reasons that all of the things have been done, and how it actually worked behind the scenes. And initially, like I think one of the big parts for me when I started using Tailwind was the massive reset that happens, where basically all of the styling either gets removed, or a very basic styling gets kind of normalized. But the majority of styling, like if you're rendering a div and then you change it to a button, it's going to look exactly the same in the rendered page. And so that was something that I thought initially, like, yeah, it's just going to, like, it means that I have to go through and style everything. Like, sure, the default styles aren't always like, you always want to unstyle a button or whatever. But if I just want a title, like a H1, and then I want a paragraph under it, I don't want to have to manually go through and style all of that myself. But then I realized that like most of the time that I spent developing the UI, I spent like resetting or undoing those stylings, and not doing it properly at like a global level, but kind of resetting them in every single component. Like I would have a button anytime I went to use a button, I would be like, all right, cool, I need to create a class for like an unstyled button. And so I realized that rather than, like, initially my perception was that I would spend so much time having to style these elements, but really it meant so much less time unstyling, that it actually like evened right out to the point where I started using the reset just by itself. I still didn't really like Tailwind.
But you saw the value of like resetting everything.
Yeah. And so that is actually developed as a separate package that you can just pull in as just a .css file. And so I started doing that for a few projects and resetting it like that, and then still using style components. That was sort of my go-to choice, was using React and style components together. And so I used the reset just to get rid of everything, and then use style components to like restyle everything to what I wanted it to look like. But yeah, over time, as I started using Tailwind more, I started just finding it like really pleasant authoring code. Like it felt like this really, like you were talking about before, how you're not jumping into a different file to do CSS and then jumping back to the HTML and then jumping back to the CSS file and like moving around constantly. It just kind of, it felt more natural to just like, I'm looking at the HTML, I'm looking at the structure, like, you don't have to keep referencing back to the HTML to see what the CSS class is called. You can look at your HTML and be like, okay, cool, I see the structure of what I have there. Something that that I think like the comparison there was using something like style components. I would declare the styles in that file. I'd have my style component above my React component, and I would call it something like because it's an actual component, so I would call it like header or something like that. But then when I created the header style component, it would just be a div, because I wouldn't think about it when I was creating like my style component. I just, everything was a div. And so when I started using Tailwind, I started thinking more about like what these components should actually be, because it's right there in your face. You're looking at the structure of your HTML and you're thinking like, should this actually be another div, or should it be a header, or should it be a nav bar? The nav bar. Should it be a nav element or something like that? Like, because you can see that structure alongside your classes, I felt like I was thinking about it more. And I think that reset really helped me start writing more semantic HTML, because I was like, well, it doesn't have to be a div because I just can't be bothered unstyling the button right now. If I know that it's a button, I'll just make it a button, and it doesn't actually add any extra work for me. So I ended up writing much more semantic HTML using Tailwind. And so I was like, well, if if I'm writing like naturally more accessible code and just better quality code for the browser to interpret, and it doesn't cost me anything, then I want to keep using this using Tailwind. But I still had that perception that I'm including this whole huge library without actually using any of it. Like I might only be using 3 rules, but I'm including this huge library to do that. And so didn't really like understand the idea of purging. And I think that was the point where when I understood the purging side of things, that just was like the selling point for me, where I was like, all right, Tailwind is awesome. I like Tailwind. It works so well for designing these components. I think I went through a similar process to what everyone does, where you think, if I want to add all of these styles, then I should probably create my own custom class so that I'm just including that one class, because otherwise I have this list of classes in my React component and it looks ugly. Well, like, what's the React way to solve that? You just make a component. Like, rather than thinking I need to go and change the Tailwind config and create all of this custom stuff, you just go, well, this is just, this is
one place.
a menu item that I use over and over again in my navbar. So then I will just create a menu item class, and then it can be ugly once, but then it doesn't matter. Like, you have a list of classes, but then you never think about it again. You just use your navbar component. The other thing was like not clashing with, like, the scoping thing was a huge thing for me, because that was why I was using styled components, was because just I hated thinking about how whether my stuff was going to clash and whether I needed to think of some crazy name to stop it from clashing. So the fact that it also gave me that, and doing the auto prefixer side of things, which styled components also did. I think they were the main reasons I was using styled components, were just I wanted scoping and I wanted the auto prefixer stuff, so I didn't have to think about browser specific
adding it yourself.
Stuff. So I got sold on Tailwind.
Nice. I like that your journey kind of reflects what we've been going through, the multiple steps, and you discovered the same kind of, not selling points, but benefits of using the approach. So it's something that's consistent. Like, I've been talking to so many people going through the whole spectrum from hating it to loving it and being unsure in between. And even myself, I when I initially rebuilt a whole corporate site in like 10 days with utility CSS, I was like, okay, I'm just going to use Tailwind for the padding and margins, because it's a nice way to sprinkle consistent values, but there's no way I can do everything with it. And then I was like, I just with Flex utilities, I can kind of do some layout. And I had 2 weeks to rebuild the site, and within 3 days, I was like, I can see that if I just remove all of the CSS and start from scratch with utilities, I will be able to do it, because it's so predictive and so easy to build something without thinking of anything else. I had the same thing, where I first initially thought I'm just going to use the reset and maybe just the padding spacing. And then the more you use it, the more you realize, wow, it takes care of so many things that I thought would be a problem otherwise. So like you asked me about the dark side of things, I want to ask you the same. I'm sure you didn't only have butterflies and happy paths. So what was some of the frictions and cons that you had using Tailwind?
Yeah, good question. So I think with, like I mentioned before, the authoring experience was really, really nice. Like, I felt like it was, it broke down that kind of creative barrier where I could just style my stuff as I was building the structure, and I didn't need to keep kind of switching context. But I found that when I revisited old code that I had written, it's quite hard to pass. Like, it's not, it's just having a big long list of things. Yes. You kind of have to think about every single property and kind of like mentally put it together. Like, it takes a lot of brain power to think conceptually what that's doing and then what you need to change about it. And I don't know, maybe it's just like my brain likes to pass those rules vertically rather than horizontally, like reading them in a big horizontal list.
Like props in components, React components.
Yeah, exactly. And or just writing CSS rules themselves, like when you have your CSS
like
rules in a CSS
pairs.
file.
Yeah,
that's right. And you can just like scan over them vertically instead of kind of scanning along horizontally. And I don't know, something about that when I'm revisiting old code that I've written, or if I'm trying to track down a bug, like a UI bug, and trying to work out where that problem is. Something about that process just doesn't
Yeah.
gel well with me. I really like the revisiting CSS more than I like revisiting Tailwind styles to fix something. But then again, now that I'm a DevRel, I don't work on big scary projects that have massive UI bugs. I get to just build small examples that just work for a short amount of time, and then it's the life cycle's done.
I have a little note on that exact point. I totally get you, and even myself, like sometimes when you want to quickly find something, you're like, it definitely. I don't agree with people say it adds garbage and clutter, because to me it's like information. It's really useful, but it does add some noise, and you have to figure out where the tag starts and finishes. Fun fact: at some point, Prettier did a thing where it would group classes by like if they were starting flex or grid or padding, Prettier would try to group them by line. And most other CSS approaches, you have 1, 2, maybe 3 classes. But with Tailwind, it made this like, if you had, let's go extreme and have like 60 utility classes on one element, it would make like 3 vertical space worth of screen real estate for one component. And I somehow kind of liked it because it brought this vertical stuff and it grouped stuff by context. But people said, Tailwind is unusable, and Prettier kind of didn't add it as an option. It was like the new default. So there's a couple of versions of Prettier where if you had it, it would automatically format it like this. And I did a couple of videos in my YouTube channel journey where the styles are like this, and everyone is like, what is this? Like, why is it every line? It's unusable. Please fix it. And to the point where Prettier kind of rolled back the idea, or like, I don't think you need any settings to not have that happen. Maybe it's an opt-in instead, because a lot of people say there's frameworks that applies lots of classes and it doesn't really work well that way. So that's one thing. And the other thing that helped me, it was a tip from Adam. So Adam has so many visual tips for like perfection, like creating videos. And one of them was never scroll horizontally, right? Like if you have these classes and you say, let's scroll right to show the class I'm talking about. He said in VS Code, you can enable line wrap or word wrap. So it still respects the Prettier formatting, but in your browser, in your text editor, if it hits the end of the line, it's just going to go to the next line. So everything is visible. It doesn't change the actual formatting of the code, but visually it wraps it. And by doing that and having a fairly narrow window, you kind of claim back this like a vertical approach that you kind of like. So maybe that's a tip you can try. Because I agree with you, like scanning through horizontal stuff when you're used to the vertical browsing with your eyes, it's a different approach.
Yeah, that is a very good tip. I should try that. One of the Prettier ones frustrated the hell out of me when it was, I think it might actually be the current default, but it like rearranges your like your class names. I don't know if it's alphabetical or just some logical way. Whenever I'm like slightly tweaking like a padding value or something, like I'll be like, let's try P4, and then you save, and then it like jumps and then you got to find it again to be able to go to try padding 4 or padding 5 or whatever. Anyway, very, very small. Off topic. The other thing, like I think in line with that same thing is just like having like my hover classes all grouped together in one separate thing. Like I found with Sass or style components, you can just say like :hover, and then you have all of your hover styles organized nicely there, again, vertically, so that you can see all of them and scan over them. And you can really easily see like, this is what it looks like when it's not hovered, and this is what it looks like when it is. When you're adding those like additional those additional states, I feel like Tailwind gets quite confusing. Like you have some states for like small screens and medium screens, and then some states for hover and some states for other stuff. That all gets a bit confusing. But other than that, like they're the only downsides that I think I have experienced so far. So I am sold. I love Tailwind. I think it's awesome. Nice. They've done an amazing job.
These sounds like surmountable drawbacks and cons, and I actually experienced both the same. Especially when you teach a video, you're like a bit more focused on the delivery and the story. So I'd say, let's add some padding P-4 and save, and then sometimes I on purpose do a padding too big to kind of show that's too big, and then go smaller, so it kind of tells the story of like iterating in the browser. And so many times I would type P-4 and look at the screen and say, okay, that's a bit too big, let's go P-2. So in my head, I type 4, so I go delete 2 to replace the 4 by 2, but the class jumped somewhere else, so I delete the last character of like a flex direction or something completely different, and so that tripped me a lot. But in a funny way, the same, that's the prettier plugin that kind of orders the classes in an opinionated way. But on the flip side of what you just said, one of the things it got created for is to group all the hover utilities in the same spot at the end. So it puts all the default baseline values first, and then hover or responsive. It groups the variants that modify only for specific states at the end. So it kind of tries to do that. But the flip side is the authoring experience. Sometimes when you just quickly, especially if you have format and save, which I have, and it sounds like you have too, that kind of jumps, which tries to help, but at the same time, it trips you up sometimes when you're not really thinking about it. So I agree with these two drawbacks, and I feel they're very, for me at least, worth the trade-offs for all the cons that all the pros that you get.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's the end of our main course of this episode. It has been super interesting learning all about Tailwind from the pro himself, and hearing all about your experience and going through working on the core team and all of that. That's been super interesting. So, I guess related to the topic of this episode, what have you been working on recently, Simon?
I am working on a workshop on Bootstrap. No, I'm kidding. I do actually love Bootstrap, and I have incredible respect for the folks that built it. I've used Bootstrap. That's got me started in my career, and that was a joke. It's not taken as a dig. Like, Bootstrap is awesome, but I'm working on on multiple workshops on Tailwind CSS. They're called Pro Tailwind, and this is my own independent course where I team up with the Badass Courses team, which is the team behind Egghead.io. There's 4 workshops. I've delivered one. Last time we spoke, I think I mentioned that I successfully delivered it without dying, and it was actually great. And I have one lined up. I don't know when you will hear this, but as I speak right now, we opened the tickets registration yesterday, and it will be held on the Thursday, 8th of September at 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific time. So I have to think hard, because for me, it's Friday, 9th of September at 6 in the morning. So every time I want to announce the date, I think my date, but I'm like, no, we live in the future over here, so go back. So this workshop, I just revealed it, is about theming multiple theme strategy in Tailwind CSS. And I mentioned it during this episode already. We use the combination of superpowers of CSS variables and then the Tailwind plugin API. And combining these two, we can make this incredible reusable and performant way to support multiple themes. And again, it's a CSS only solution, even if all of it is using JavaScript to build as a developer. The solution is entirely CSS based. So there's CSS variables that can change at runtime in the browser. So there's no JavaScript involved. Just the theme switcher, I guess I use React, but I've seen a cool example, I think, again, from Jen Simmons in her Has demos. One of them is a checkbox, and it's used to toggle dark mode. It just checks has checked is true, like the attribute that says that a checkbox is checked. If it has that, it changes the CSS variable value, and then everything inherits the new values. So it's like 100% CSS and HTML only theming strategy, including the theme switcher, which is pretty cool. That's not what we're doing, but yeah, the whole multi-theme in Tailwind, which is quite hard to think about. It gives you a robust approach you can use in multiple projects. That's what I'm working on. What are you working on, John?
That all sounds amazing. Yeah, I'm very excited for this to turn into a full purchasable
online
course that I can do, because I can't make those crazy time zones, unfortunately. But I have been working on my new Egghead course, which went out I think 2 weeks ago now. Nice. And this is caching Supabase data at the edge using Cloudflare workers and KV storage. So this is just an awesome pattern that I have just been loving lately, where it's like when you have an origin server that's one central location, how do you minimize the amount of trips that you need to make to that server? And so Supabase is exactly that. You have one origin database server living somewhere that you can choose. But then if you have someone on the other side of the world that wants to get their data from there, you don't want to make them wait around. And so what is a way that we can cache that data as close as possible to the users? And the answer to that is the edge, using Cloudflare Workers and KV storage. So I'm actually going to build our navbar website using this exact, well, not this exact stack. It's actually going to be slightly different. And so with our navbar episodes, we have a Notion document or a Notion database where we keep all of our kind of ideas for different shows that we could do, and we kind of use that as our our tracking software, our planning software for, or project management software as to where each episode is up to and which ones are ready to record and which ones have been released. And so I want to make a request to the Notion API to get all of that data and display it on a page in a Remix application. But that ends up being pretty non-performant, because the Notion API sometimes takes a little bit of time to respond, especially if you have a huge amount of data that you're going and getting. And so the best way to solve that is to put a caching layer in front of it. So if you only need to fetch that data once, and then that data is pretty much going to stay fresh for a long time, like we're not going to probably change episodes that have already been published, that's a perfect use case for when you can have some very heavy caching that can remember that value and not need to keep hitting the Notion API. So by the time you hear this episode, this information will be old, but today I will be streaming actually building that website, or over the next 3 days I'll be streaming building that. And the crowd goes wild. If you want to watch that, then you will be able to go and check it out on my YouTube channel. So it'll be youtube.com/c/John Myers. And you can go and watch me building out the navbar website using Remix, the Notion API, Cloudflare Workers, and KV storage.
So wait, what I love about this is it's a legitimate real world use case. Like, we started this podcast and we want to make a website and have our notes show up. And it's, I didn't think of that until you mentioned it, but I've heard a few times that the way the Notion API works, it's super powerful, but it fetches a lot of things and it can be a little bit slow. And this website would typically be mostly once a show is out, it's not like a living document. We might add some links to the show notes or something, but a lot of it is static. So having that layer that caches the data and then serves it really fast is actually a super good use case. And it's not like you had to create a fictive project to showcase the tech. It's like a real project, and there's a real use case. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's the thing. This pattern I just keep seeing everywhere where I can apply it. Like my own personal blog, I'm going to refactor a little bit to do exactly this. And so yeah, I just keep wanting to rebuild things in this way, because it's just super exciting how efficient it is for that kind of website. It's awesome.
Very cool.
So shall we move into the open bar? Do you have a sound effect for us, Simon?
I'm going to try to bring the sound effect. No, that's a terrible miss. I'm not gonna do my freestyle rap. Not happening. But I'm gonna try to bring the. Oh, we couldn't hear it.
Look at that.
Basically, that sound was supposed to, but I can't control the different volume of different pads. So this is where the power of this mixing thing stops. There's one volume for each sound pad. I can't hit it harder to like a sensitive drum pad. What am I saying?
What?
Open bar.
What are you saying?
The bar is open.
Bar. It gets messy when we open the bar. What have you been enjoying doing this week? What has been
it's not this week, but it's something I wanted to talk about, and then it took a drastic turn where I didn't want to talk about it, and then I want to talk about it again. We had these little puppies. If you don't know by now, you know, but we had little puppies exactly 3 weeks ago. Every time we record a podcast, it's their week anniversary. And 3 weeks is kind of like the milestone where they can stop just deciding to die for no reasons. Like, puppies are very unpredictable the first few weeks. And a couple of weeks ago, I wanted to do the open bar discussion on something cool that I've done tech-wise with my son around puppies. And then one of these puppies, the day after we talked, died. And I was like, I actually don't want to talk about this. But now I've processed it and I want to talk about it. So taking care of puppies can be really, really hard work, especially if you have to do an intervention where you have to feed them yourself because the mom refuses to, or they don't know how to find the little source of milk and actually suck and swallow it. And it's more common than you think, as I've discovered now. Like, we had 9 puppies at birth. One was born dead straight away. And I was like, oh my God, what happened? And then we have only 6 left. They're really healthy, but that you can feel the trauma of like losing 30% of the 9 puppies. And the vet said to me the day I said there's 9, she said she knew nothing about what was going to happen. She said, just let you know. But I didn't really read it properly until it happened. She said there's about a 30% loss in litters, like for more than 6 puppies. But all this to say, I'm happy again now. I've processed all this. But what I had done with my son, because we had to figure out exactly how much milk we should feed. So there's some guidelines. For the first week, you need to feed, if you have to feed it manually, it's every 2 hours, and it's a proportion of their body weight in milliliters of milk. And so it happens to be 7 mil. So 7 milliliters, if you can't think about it, it's about the size of your pinky, like in a little, like not even like it's the size of your nail. Actually, it's super, super small. And every 2 hours, we had to feed this seemingly meaningless amount. But if you feed more, the body can't process it, and it kind of gets stuck, and then they either vomit it or it stays in, and then they get bloated and they don't have room for the next. Like, it's super tricky. And so I was like with my son on paper, like we were weighing I say my son, there was my wife and daughter as well, but then we were weighting them and putting the numbers. And then I showed my son, hey, let's have an Excel sheet, like a Google spreadsheet. And we, instead of putting these values on paper, we put it in the spreadsheet. And then we can use that value, and we can have a rule that says, here's the ratio per body weight. And then it's going to tell us like every 2 hours how much to feed them. Because it changes every time you weigh them, they gain 10%, so you have to readjust. And as you can imagine, every 2 hours mean in the middle of the night as well. So here's the challenge. Wake up at 3 in the morning completely groggy because you've done a feed at 1, or at 11 p.m. because your partner did the other one. And then you have to do the mental math of how many milliliters of milk to feed at 3 in the morning in the dark. So we did that Excel sheet, and I had myself to do some research on not on the formula to calculate how much milk, but the hard part was like, how is it that every time we add a new value each day of the weight, it picks that last value to update the formula. And I figured out I forgot how it's called, a crazy function that kind of looks at a list of cells, and it takes the last non-empty cell. It has a very specific name in Excel jargon. And so this part I couldn't teach my son because it's like very nerdy, like VBA, or I don't know how the Excel formulas language is. But everything else I said, okay, we have the value of the last cell. So if I add a new weight, it's going to pick that. And then I was like, we can divide, because the vet gave us a rule. It's like 60 milliliters per kilo, or I forgot there's a formula. So I said we can divide his weight by the amount he needs daily. And then every 2 hours, there's 24 hours in a day, so we can divide it by 12. And we wrote this little form. He wrote the formula to the maths to kind of figure out that. And then he was like, oh, this is pretty cool. But what he didn't realize is every single day, you weigh the puppy, you put the new value, and then it tells you what the next feed value is. And he was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I know, like, this was like a real use case. Like, it was life-saving for us to not have to think about it. And I know I implanted in my son's brain, like, one day he's going to just start a new spreadsheet and do like basketball stats, or like he's going to shoot 6 out of 17 in the game, and he's going to figure out how to calculate the percentage. And I know I've planted this idea that you can do so many things with a spreadsheet. And that was a really great way to introduce that. because he was
That is
keeping it
so
on
cool.
paper, and we were doing this math with the calculator, and I thought, I'm a tech nerd. That's a legit way to improve the process. And then my wife can take her phone, and we have this shared Google Drive, so she can see it as well. So all of us could at any time check the values. And my wife is at school. If she missed the weighing session in the morning, she can look at the updated value. And yeah, that was like a great way to introduce the value of tech, besides just building a website for the sake of learning tech. Like this was like a lesson of like, this is super powerful. And then if you want, you can do a UI that pulls this data like you're doing for with Remix. Instead of the Notion API, you can use the Google Sheets API, or I'm sure there's a way to export as JSON or something. And yeah, I thought that would be a perfect way to plant the seed of how tech can be used in cool ways.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah, I think Excel spreadsheets is the gateway drug to
Oh yeah.
a lifelong developer career. That's awesome. Well, this episode has been going for quite a while, and so I'm just going to give a shout out to this lovely weather that's happening here in Australia. We're finally starting to move away from those drizzly, miserable winter days, and we're moving into spring and getting some beautiful sunshine. And it's making me feel very positive. Hence, if you're watching the video, you can see that Simon and I have all of our windows open and we're getting lots of fresh air. Yeah, sleeves are rolled up.
If you're not familiar with Australia, getting towards spring means for the rest of the world is you shift from winter to summer straight away. Like our spring, I don't know about Melbourne, but I think it's the spring is like automatically hits the 20 plus range, like really nice warm shorts, t-shirts, barbecue outside lifestyle for about 9 months. And then winter is when it gets really nasty. I think Melbourne is a bit more four-seasony, but at least in Sydney, we have winter that's terribly cold, and then it's like hot/terribly hot for the rest of the year.
Yeah, it gets pretty miserable, especially I'm up in the kind of rainforesty area, which is really lovely, but during winter it gets
Humidity,
gets a bit miserable. But yes, I am very much looking forward to these lovely sunny days. And I saw earlier that you're rocking the exact same outfit of me with a hoodie and then shorts. So that's the perfect transitional outfit from
spring
winter into spring. We know that the weather is getting nicer. So thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, my name is John Myers. You can find me at johnmyers_io on Twitter.
And I'm Simon Brashliotis. I am Simon Swiss on all things, but mostly Twitter is the place I check way too many times a day. Hit me up there if you want to chat. Thank you so much for listening. I promise I will get better. I speak less and less going forward. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Nice. We're still live, so I'm just going to... I'm sorry we missed the comments. I'm sure there was good stuff.
Yeah, sorry.
Leonardo
I did see it at
Brazil.
some point, and then I was like, oh, this isn't it. Like, it won't make sense if we jump back to it now. But yeah, we can go through them.
10 degrees. So Brazil is like, no, it's South America, so it's also the winter there, I think. I always tend to think that Australia has inverted seasons for the rest of the world, but there's other places south of
there are other southern hemisphere.
I guess it depends.
Places,
If you're near south of Brazil, that would be cold. And if you're near the equator, because Brazil is like very vertically spread, well, horizontally, it's a big country. It's not, I wish I would pull more. There's something that doesn't need to go in the podcast, but no, that's not this one. Sorry. I'll pull it back again. But I read something which makes me think that you missed one part. The question is, why is Simon not appearing anymore in Tailwind Labs YouTube channel? Nice to keep doing a great job. So I addressed this. Maybe you took a break or didn't know, but I have been removed from the Tailwind Labs team, and so I don't work for Tailwind Labs. I don't have access to the YouTube channel, so that's why I'm not posting videos. It wasn't really communicated, but I think people figured that out. I said it on Twitter. I said it here now. And you might see Tailwind stuff from me on my own YouTube channel and most likely on Pro Tailwind, which is this protailwind.com website. I think I want it to become a hub for everything I do about Tailwind. even if I do YouTube content, it's probably gonna be also hosted there. And the idea in the long term, like you think something like CSS tricks, people just always land there because there's so much articles and resources. And if you ever have a question about SEO, no, sorry, not SEO, about CSS Grid or Flexbox, you always end up on CSS Tricks Bible post about CSS Grid and Flexbox. And the ultimate dream is that many things you search about Tailwind, you end up into these like really good resources that are, some of them are free, some of them are for the people that purchase the course. Like just try to have this nice base. But I do want to do YouTube stuff. I'll probably do non-Tailwind stuff, and all the Tailwind stuff is going to be consolidated. It doesn't mean that it's all behind paywall. I want it to be a free resource as well. So it's just creating momentum towards the whole thing I built. So I thought I would address that. I just want the thing to go for another 6 hours.
Yeah, Simon hasn't talked enough yet. Yeah. Thank you for subscribing as well, Leonardo. That's awesome. And yeah, if you want to join us each week, we'll do this around the same time each week. Sometimes we'll start a bit early, sometimes we'll start a bit late. But if this is a time that you are awake and it's convenient, you should come join us each week. I'm going to have to run, though, because I am hungry and I've also only had one coffee. And so my energy levels are starting to plummet. I know. Yeah, no, that's what I mean. I've been sitting here like slowly, like if I get to talk, then I get to, I get the energy back. I get the blood flowing. But yeah,
I got one last fun thing to say. I went for a walk with the dog, one dog, because the mom puppy doesn't walk that far yet. And I came back at 10 p.m. and every now and then my wife and I have cheeky chocolates in the evening when the kids go to bed. And I didn't, because I came so late, I went almost straight to bed and I didn't notice a little container here that was full of little, I don't know if you know the bullets. It's like little bullet-shaped chocolates in Australia.
Yeah, little licorice.
And so the idea was like she put it, so I come home and I do whatever computer stuff before bed and I find it. And I found it this morning. And I was like, that works.
What a special treat.
I had double coffee and then all the chocolate that gives the energy that you can see now and hear and feel.
Yeah, you've got the caffeine running through your veins. I'm going to go get some caffeine running through my veins. But thank you all so much for watching and listening and hanging out with us. It's been awesome. And we will see you again next week.
See you later. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Bye.
And this is just me. I'm going to end.